Hello everyone and welcome to This Nintendo Life episode 245. My name is NBZ and I am officially now an American Bally. It has happened and I don't think I ever want to go back there again. I think I'm done. I'm done with America as a place. But I did survive.
That. I still think your trip was better than my trip.
Yeah, I don't know. What? Oh, you mean your actual trip that you just took, as opposed to your most recent trip to
America. My trip to down south. Where Bally Jr. managed to infect 7 people, including me and Caroline, with his sick bug that made me throw up for the first time in 20 years.
We need to dig into this, right? Because I don't know if we've explained it that much on the podcast, but Bally doesn't puke. Like, it's this weird thing. There's I remember a time back, when we were at school where we were on a bus and I was very sick and I needed to go to the back.
The whole bus was throwing up.
Everyone was throwing up and Bally was like, why are you so sick? And I'm like, why are you not, you weirdo? So Bally just has an iron stomach and just doesn't puke at any time ever. Even when you've been drunk or whatever. It's extremely rare.
So I did throw up from alcohol 10 years ago. I will admit to that. But I've not thrown up from sickness in over 20 years. And let me tell you, my iron stomach was working hard because my stomach was, and my consciousness was being like, no, you will not throw up. It's not happening. And I kid you not, my body was like, Bally, you are going to throw up no matter what. This is going to happen. I could feel my feet and my hands tingling and pulsating as my body was trying to force it out of me. Honestly, it felt like, I was going to say an exorcism. I don't know what an exorcism feels like, but it felt like
exorcisms don't really exist. But
honestly,
sure,
this bug was like, Bally, you are not going to not be sick. You absolutely have to do it. And yeah, it happened. And yeah, it was rough. But honestly, it's one of those things where had me and Caroline not had Bally Jr., Caroline would be in the bathroom with me like, Bally, are you all right? Is it okay? And but you can't. We've got a kid. She's looking after him. I'm in the bathroom by myself, just getting on with it. That's just life. So yeah, that made our trip very fun indeed. Followed by about 10 days of Bally Jr. having diarrhea. So
good stuff.
I'm talking 14 nappy changes a day.
Jesus Christ.
We'd we change his nappy. Half an hour later, we hear his butt bubbling again, and it's right, take. Honestly, it was soul destroying, that trip. But to his credit, he was an absolute trooper on the drive up and down, where we only did 2 stops all the way from Edinburgh down to Oxted, and then on the way back, Basingstoke to Edinburgh.
That could have been a lot worse. So
it could have been a lot worse. Oh, and then just to rub it all in, part of the car fell off, and that cost £300 to fix at the garage.
Shit. Okay. Well, not great. Not successful.
It was like a suspension coil. So yeah, I think your trip, as even though you had a couple of rougher areas, was still a little bit better than that. But
it was definitely a lot better. I mean, I had some other cool things happen as well, like a GDC going to the IGF Awards, which was amazing because one of our games was nominated, and then it won the award, and I was like, what the fuck? What's going on here? So that was amazing. And then I also, I talked about this a little bit on Twitter, but I was a BAFTA judge this year for BAFTA games. So I was part of the jury deciding on one of the categories. So I don't know. Things have been going in opposite directions, I guess, in some ways for us. But, we'll come back in the end to this little podcast to talk about video games. And that's what we're going to do here today. Bally, do you want to tell the folks at home what today's show is going to entail?
Yeah. So there was a little, was it a Zelda Direct? It was just like a presentation.
It was Anuma sitting at a desk doing a Let's Play.
Anuma at a desk, looking very handsome as always, telling us a little bit about Tears of the Kingdom. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about the games that we have been playing. And then for the second segment, we are going to get back to some emails. It's been a few shows, so we're going to dive into those.
Absolutely. And if you want to check out some behind the scenes from my travels in America, you can head over to our Patreon, patreon.com/ThisNintendoLife, and I put up a kind of travel log there for $5 and above patrons. So
having listened to it, it is very entertaining. I had a really good time listening to it. It was fun hearing your journey through the land of spicy chicken sandwiches.
Oh boy, yeah, that was a fun adventure. So yeah, if you want to hear my thoughts on GDC and all the stuff that happened at Disney, yeah, go ahead and check that out. And yeah, you'll get a bit more in depth. But Bally, let's kick things off with the Zelda is happening, it's coming, and they did drop that big old thing, that big old video. And I actually was, speaking of Disney, in Disney on that day.
Yeah.
So I was like basically in line for Rise of the Resistance when that was happening, and I'm like, I don't have the time to look at this right now. But the thing is, the Wi-Fi at Disney was quite good, so what I ended up doing was I went on those couple of rides, and then I was waiting in line for Star Tours, and so Star Tours was like a half an hour wait in the line, so I was like, all right, this is a great opportunity for me to get my phone out, get some Wi-Fi, and sit there and watch this Tears of the Kingdom presentation, and I was pretty delighted with it. I think there's lots of cool stuff in here that we can dig into. But I think fundamentally what this said is, hey, look, you know all that cool physics and chemistry stuff that we were doing before? How about we amplify that 10 times and see what comes out the other end of it? So, yeah, I'm coming away from it pretty positive. How are your kind of overall feelings, Bally, going into this final month, basically, before the game comes out?
I'm very positive. I messaged you, having watched it, saying, I think you're going to like this 10 minutes of gameplay. I didn't know what to expect, and with 10 minutes, it's so short that you think, are they going to actually demonstrate anything that's that interesting in that time? And they definitely did. Like, they introduced a number of mechanics that we were unaware of or like didn't know fully how they would work. And they have me very excited about that game. And I think what's so great is that it dangled the carrot without giving too much away, and that's ultimately the perfect balance of what you want. It's like a teaser trailer, but with gameplay, like it's just teasing it, and that's exactly what we wanted.
And I have to say, I always appreciate Nintendo for this, because they tend to always be like, okay, our presentation, we're not going to do a thing where we give you a cinematic story thing, or we're not going to do a thing where we start explaining the world. We're like, no, here's the video game. Here it is. This is us playing it. This is what it looks like. This is what you are going to experience firsthand. And I think that's well on display in this little presentation. So yeah, I guess we can kind of dig into like the particulars of it and the things that are going on here. The funny thing I found actually was that every single thing that they show in this video has been shown in a trailer before, only we didn't have the context for it, right? So
really?
There have
including
been moments,
the first ability, the
rewind. Yep. So the recall thing was shown in a trailer where Link rolls a spiky ball back up a hill.
Right. Sorry, I didn't mean recall. I meant the merging of weapons.
Well, actually, if you look at, so there's one shot in one of the trailers where Link has this big kind of like hammer that shoots out a fireball at the end of it, where he does a front flip and shoots that. That's a fused weapon, right?
Totally.
And there's another one where he has a dragon arm on with like fire coming out of it. Again, that's likely another fused weapon, right? So that was shown off, as well as the Ascendancy, because that's in I think maybe the second trailer where he like comes up through the rock, so we knew about that. And then obviously putting all the vehicles together was the most recent trailer, was the thing that was shown. So they have actually shown us all these mechanics in these trailers over the years, but we never really had the context for what any of them were and how they all tied together. And fundamentally, what we are being shown here are 4 abilities, much like the 4 abilities from the first game, right? Because Breath of the Wild had the bombs. Obviously, that kind of split into 2 types, so technically 5 abilities, but really in practice 4. And that's weird, isn't it? They split square bombs and round bombs like that, but anyway, that's what they ended up doing.
I mean, they have 2 very different purposes, so
kind of, but they're still bombs.
They are still bombs.
But yeah, you still had fundamentally the 4 abilities, right? With Magnesis and with Cryosis and the stop time one as well. So all of those 4 abilities were the 4 that you got at the beginning, and then you went out into the world. Now my question is, are these the only 4 abilities that you get in this game, or are you getting those other abilities back again? Because seemingly this is all tied to Link's arm as opposed to the Sheikah Slate, which he doesn't have, and presumably maybe Zelda has, like we've seen her with it in one of the trailers. So there's an interesting thing there of like, there's still, as Anuma says at the end, we still have a lot of secrets and mysteries to tell you about. And I don't know, is there a world in which, as we keep talking about, is Zelda playable? Is there a world in which Zelda has those abilities and Link has these abilities? I don't know. That's just kind of idle speculation on my part. But Bally, do you think these are the only 4 core abilities we're going to have in this game, similar to the first one?
That's a really, really tough question, actually, when you break it down. I'm going to say we will get the abilities from the first game, because I think if you're making the bold decision of essentially using the same world, and it's an expanded world, it's not the same world, it's an expanded world, but if you're using the same expanded world and then you're ultimately using the same physics engine and everything, I feel like you could get quite a lot of gameplay out of those existing mechanics if you chose to use them. And I think they probably decided, you know what, it is probably right to use them. And I think Zelda using the Sheikah Slate is a great shout. I think that might be what happened. You're right.
Yeah, my only thing is like, there will be so many possibilities, right? If you think about the puzzle solving potential of the first game, like what happens if you combine like freezing time with rewinding? Like, is that possible? Like, what kind of weird chaos stuff happens? And I think
in the first game, I think you could only use one ability at a time, right? Like if you swapped to stasis from the bombs, for example, didn't your bomb literally disappear? Am I making that up? I can't remember.
Yeah, no, that could be the case. It could be the case that those don't interact in that way, and you kind of have to do them separately.
Right. That's not to say someone will still break the game and manage to do it, because that's obviously what happened in the first game. But I think that they'll. I think based on the fact that, I think, was it Jeff Grubb who said, like, you can pick one of two things, and like it's interesting, the discussion about what a sequel is, and some people saying this just looks like DLC. It's like, well, Uncharted 2 basically was the same mechanics as the Uncharted 1, but they gave a new story, and no one's debating that that's a sequel rather than DLC. But when the Zelda team decide to use the same world and then expand the world and then change the mechanism, like it's a sequel to me. So I think Jeff Grubb's point was either they were going to essentially do Uncharted 2, where you do an entirely new world, you probably keep some of the mechanics the same, maybe akin to Majora's Mask, although that's not really fair because Majora does mix up mechanics quite substantially. Totally. But they went with the option of, actually, we're just going to completely upturn the mechanics, keep the world the same, and then obviously expand the world. And based on what we've seen so far, it seems like the right call.
Yeah, I think, like, looking at the Sky Islands that we've seen so far, there seems like a significant number and a significant size to them, and just the process of getting up there, because you'll notice from the first ability with recall, I don't know why they call it recall and not rewind, because when they press the button on the object, it says rewind, but then they call the ability recall, but whatever, I guess because it will have some other broader applications, like I wonder if it works on enemies, right? Can you rewind enemies backwards? Because the freeze stuff certainly worked on enemies, right? You can freeze enemies that were riding horses, and the horse would like ride away from underneath them, and they would kind of be hanging in midair. So I wonder if that is just kind of covering more bases is with the name there. But you'll notice when that was done on that piece of rock that fell from the sky, it basically had a timer, and it went all the way up to its apex, and then it was like, well, this is done now. It's going to start falling again, or you have to jump off and get rid of it. So that's not going to get you all the way up to the sky. You're going to have to find other ways of getting to those platforms once you are up there, and you know, those other abilities, potentially ascendancy or ascend, is going to help you with that. And there is the possibility, right, that you're on the ground and you're looking up to the sky. Can you just zoom all the fucking way up to the sky? Because there's a big distance, right? And we saw him jump from there, or get knocked off the side and fall all the way to the ground.
Do you mean using ascend?
Yeah, getting all the way back up. It has
to be through a material, they said.
Like, exactly. So, like, here's the idea, right, is you're standing on the ground on Hyrule, and there's a sky island above you, and if you're exactly below a piece of rock that is up above you.
But that's what I'm saying. You're not going through a material. That'd be going through air. Like,
well, no. You would eventually hit the material, right? That is technically above you. Like, it is technically a ceiling. It's just like thousands of feet above you.
I'm very confident that's not how that works.
But I think it's possible, just because in that trailer, if you remember the first time we saw it, Link comes up from nowhere up onto that platform, right? So I think there is a real possibility of being able to do that.
But you have to be able to look up at the ceiling and use it onto the ceiling.
Exactly.
So you can't, if the Sky Island is out of range and is like miles away, I don't see it working.
Well, I definitely feel like it's an upgrade, possibly, right? Like a way in which you can like extend it.
The one that we saw, I would be surprised if it worked that way. But I'm also,
Yeah.
how do you feel about like, climbing was a key part of the first game, and this potentially eliminates a lot of climbing. If, say, you get to a mountain, you realize there's a cave in that mountain, you're now essentially able to go through the entire mountain to the summit.
Yeah.
Does that excite you, or does that make you think, actually, I really enjoyed climbing in Breath of the Wild, and I kind of want to keep doing that? Or, in my opinion, I think the game will make sure that there's a variety of mountains where some of them, yes, you can go straight through the middle, and others you'll still have the climbing challenge.
Yeah, I wonder if there has to be some kind of limitation on that, or probably not, actually, because like they don't like limitation, I think, in this style of game. They want you to have the option. I think part of the interesting kind of approach they have here is that some of these abilities are almost workarounds for things that people didn't like in the first game. So people who didn't like stamina in terms of climbing, now you can just zoom up into the middle of a thing and just burst through it, right? And that's like a potential speedrunning tactic. It's a thing for people who don't want to go through that hard labor of getting up somewhere. But it's kind of like circumventing a thing that people maybe had a bit of an issue with, in the first game. If it's raining, for example, you can go inside and just poop up there instead of just, trying to climb and falling down the whole time. So it's like an additional method to get somewhere. And I think, I don't know, I like climbing a lot, and I think the nice thing is that it's an option, so you don't have to use it, right? If you want to go and make that climb yourself, you're certainly able to do so, but it just offers the option to other people who are not.
I would want the option of knowing that by choosing to climb a mountain versus ascending through it, that there's some benefit to climbing, whether that might be collecting mushrooms along the way or something. Like, I want there to be some benefit to going the long way around, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I totally see that. I think that it's similar with the fuse thing, where like people are like complaining about weapons breaking. They're like, well, if one's about to break, you just join it with something else and it becomes a new thing, right? So they feel like ways of kind of patching over some rough points for certain people, while still introducing new ideas and new abilities and things that people can do. So yeah, I think there's flexibility there, and if you want to use it, you can. And I feel like there has to be more to it, right? Like, I feel like there's other layers that we're maybe not thinking about with what you can do with this ability. And I wonder if there is a thing that happens that lets you go down as well as up, right? Because that would make it multifunctional and like allow you to get into spaces that otherwise you might not have been able to, right? Hollowed out rocks that are inaccessible and like hidden completely unless you dive down into them. That sort of thing I think could be quite cool. And has a lot of potential, but we'll see how they expand things, because there were upgrades you could get for those runes in the first game. And I think that there's room for expansion here with these things and what they could potentially do with them. But we haven't really touched on Fuse, which I think is probably the most earth-shattering one of these, whereby you can basically take two things, whatever they are, and just meld them together. And this seems to act mainly with your weapon and your shield, as well as your bow in a slightly different way. So how do you feel about this thing? I think this is like the most wild thing that they showed.
It is
and
so wild.
It just opens the possibility space so ridiculously that people are going to do some crazy stuff with it.
Yeah, it's super wild, because you saw the number of items on, like, so many of these items are from the first game, like the enemy parts and the eyes and the wings and the chew jelly. And it's kind of like, so now every single item that you can think of from Breath of the Wild has like another mechanism to it when it's attached to your weapon. Like, that is wild in and of itself. Like, so for example, Anuma like attached a leaf, and he was about to fire this arrow with a leaf, and then he swapped to another item, and now everyone's like, so what does the leaf do? I want to know. Like, it's really cool. It completely forces you, if you want to benefit from this, you really do have to think outside the box, and like, what is the most efficient way of dealing with these enemies? I think this will be especially the case early in the game, where resources are limited, and you felt that in Breath of the Wild as well, where I would love the privilege of, creating a smoke bomb using a mushroom and then instantly insta-death someone from behind. Like, that's a great use of materials early in the game when your materials are limited, So I think early in the game especially, that's a really cool idea. And you think of like what's the special island in the southwest of Breath of the Wild?
Oh,
Southeast,
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah,
Eventide Island, right?
Yeah.
Like that. It's almost playing on the like. Imagine these mechanics in Eventide Island. Like,
oh boy,
it's wild to think about. I'm excited when the game forces you to do something innovative to get out of a sticky situation. Yes, it's cool where, hey, yeah, my shot's not that great today, like Anuma was saying. He said his like sights going or his reactions are going or something. He's like, I'm just going to stick this eyeball to the front of my arrow and it's going to home in. That is cool. I get that. But I want there to be a puzzle or a dead end that forces me to think outside the box and gives me multiple options of doing that. You know, like we don't know much about shrines yet. I really hope there are shrines that leave you 4, 5, 6 items just on a bench in front of you and says, right, you have to get out of this dungeon or something. And it's like, okay, right, well, I'm going to try this. And it's just that experimentation of, yes, I'm going to take this item, fire. Okay, this does that. That gives me a boost. And oh my God, I've used these 5 items together in unique ways to get out of that dungeon. And then I want the ability to say to you, MBZ, I did this, this, and this to get out of that dungeon. And you come back with me and say, oh, well, I did this opposite thing and still got out of the dungeon. Like, that's what I'm waiting for. Because at the moment in the open world space, as cool as it is, I want there to be a bit more funneling of ideas and funneling of forcing the player into doing something specific.
Right, and you kind of want these to apply to getting around the place as well and trying to have that impact. And I wonder if, obviously we have the whole vehicle building thing, which is very much focused on that. But yeah, I think that it's cool that you're taking these items that in the base game, or in the first game, I should say, were basically just crafting tools.
I love
for
that you
potions.
said base game.
Yeah, God, it really, oh man, it's so similar though, isn't it? Like in visual style and like world and everything, that it's hard to not think of it as kind of like a kind of building on top of the blocks of what already existed. But those items were very much like, well, I'm just going to toss these in a pot and see if I can make a potion, right? And there was kind of a random cooking element to it, which I'm sure still exists in this game, but now those resources mean something different, and like it actually matters what you pick up from enemies, and like every single one is going to have some kind of different effect depending on what you equip it with. And I think that just makes for me, the thing that I was worried about is like losing that kind of joy of experimentation. Like I always talk about, I hit the chew jelly with a fire sword and it became fire chew jelly, right? Like that's one of my favorite moments in Breath of the Wild. And it feels like they heard me and were like, hey, how about we do that 700 more times in this game? Yeah. And that's what it's going to be, is it's going to be there's now going to be an excitement to finding a fucking key swing. Like, who gives a shit about key swing in any other Zelda game? It's like, whatever. Then I'm like, oh, what the hell is this going to do if I put an arrow with a key swing? Is it going to, like, become an autonomous arrow that is like a follower that follows me around and attacks with me or some shit? Like, who knows? Like, it feels like there's a magical possibility here with all those kind of materials. And not only that, it's just like stuff that you find in the world. Like, he showed the long stick with the big farmer's pike, and now it's just like the biggest stick in the world. And it's like, that is so dumb, but like perfect, right? Because there is a legitimate way in which that helps the player like maintain distance between enemies, and you know, like actually has an applicable use within the world, as dumb as it looks. Like,
are you happy with just those things existing in the open world, or do you hope that, like I was saying, the game forces you into certain areas, like a shrine or the equivalent, whatever that's going to be, that forces you to be like, oh, here's this gap and this spear that attaches to this stick that you can only poke the switch on the other side of the gap by melding the two, you know, like that's what I need, that kind of thing.
I think that would be cool. I do think that they're going to take a more hands-off approach to it, as opposed to what you're talking about, which is like go into a space and they give you stuff, because obviously the first game and this game also rely upon you're just collecting everything around the world, and so whatever you have going into whatever situation is what you're going to have, and that leads to the situations you're talking about of like both of us having different things going in, and so different solutions coming out.
I would say, though, that there are a handful of shrines, especially in the DLC, I wanted to say, actually, of the first game, where, especially around the electricity mechanic, where it really did feel open-ended, where there were so many different ways of attaching metal items together, and it also depended massively on how many metal items you've got in your rucksack ready to, like, stretch across the shrine, connecting circuits and unlocking doors, and like that kind of creativity. Like for me, Breath of the Wild is obviously my favorite game of all time. Those were the highlights of that physics chemistry system, and I really hope that there are at least a handful of areas of the game where it really forces you into that kind of lateral thinking to progress the shrine or whatever it may be.
Yeah, totally. I definitely want to see more puzzles, right? Like, I mean, that's what I want from this game, is like they've given you creative stuff, so now give me puzzles to solve with that stuff. And we haven't seen any shrines or anything that looks like shrines, but I don't know what their approach is going to be for that. I'm sure there will be something, they just haven't told us yet, so we'll have to wait and find out. But in terms of traversal, though, I mean, this whole vehicle building stuff is it's nuts, dude. And I think that Nintendo have this real knack for simplifying things that other games have done for years that are much harder, right? Like, think about us playing Grounded, right? And you having a faff of a time trying to build things and put walls up and just understanding how to do it. And then Nintendo come in here and they're like, oh no, building is easy. You just do this and you yoink it over here and it automatically attaches with this glue and then you're done. Boom, you made a raft, the fans are on it, you hit them and off you go. And like, looking at Mario Maker and the way in which that kind of took design tools and simplified them down and made it such an approachable, easy kit for people to engage with, this feels like that for like crafting and building stuff in a way that's just, I don't know, I think there's definitely drawbacks to it, right? Where you kind of have to be in an area, at least seemingly from this, you have to be in an area with all the stuff you need to move around. Like, you can imagine being like, oh, this thing's, you know, a mile away and I have to spend 5 minutes walking across the world having my hand hold it in order to move it across there. You know, if there's some kind of like Pokeball style thing where you can tap materials into it and carry them with you, I mean, that would be great, because then you can just pop them all out wherever you are and, you know, attach and glue things together.
This was covered in, I think it was Zeltic's video on YouTube. He's like a big Zelda YouTuber, and he was making the point, like, there are these areas next to the stables that look like they're just planks of wood and beams and things that are clearly placed together to build vehicles. Like, they're specifically placed there. So I agree with what you're saying. Like, oh, I'm gonna have to log X to across the map to Y, but hopefully there's enough, like, here we're just laying all these items out for you to build whatever you want and just kind of work
maybe it's
on
like a crafting hub thing where you can kind of call all of the resources you've gathered to that one spot and use it as a place to kind of build something. And then maybe similar to horses, it's like once you've built a vehicle, you can register the vehicle and then you can use it wherever you want. Right?
I'd be really surprised if that was the case, but
maybe.
You're right. I really want to know, why do I want to get a car across Hyrule Field versus ride a horse? Like, I want to know, does it even matter, or is there going to be a reason that you need the car, not the horse? Obviously, for flight, it makes sense. You can't fly on a horse. Obviously, I get that, and I get it for like the raft across this expanse of water. I get that, and I thought that example was a really good one to show off in the gameplay. But especially for land traversal, why do I want to go in a car across Hyrule Field, or like a thing on four wheels?
Yeah, and I think that comes down to it, like a storage thing as well, or like carrying things. Like, remember in the original game where people would try and move stuff across the map by like slowly shuffling things and like carrying them manually? Like, what if there was an orb that is required on the opposite side of the map? You can't carry that on a horse, right? And you can't put it in your inventory. But if you make a kind of vehicle where you can leave things sitting, or make a holder for them where you can kind of pop it on the ground and still move the vehicle, like, it allows you to transfer stuff. So like, potentially transferring objects across space is the best example I can think of for doing that, because then obviously you can't do that on a horse, right? Or even on the motorcycle that you get in the first game. So yeah, that's a potential way of doing it. But yeah, I get what you mean. Like, it feels like it's more for personal, just like, I want to ride a vehicle and look cool, as opposed to kind of functionality necessarily. We'll see. But yeah, I think that the thing that makes me most excited is honestly just being on Twitter when this game comes out, right? Because you are going to see some wild creations that people have made. Nintendo have already shown like full aircraft stuff, right? Full flight abilities.
Oh, all like the hot air balloon stuff is wild. Like, just what's the maximum height of this world? You know, like, how high can I go? Because the skydiving stuff looks very cool. Like, the amount of 3D vertical space is very impressive. And okay, here's a theoretical question I had, and I really hope it's not the case.
Okay.
Was there any point in the development of this game where the people working on it were thinking, we'd love for X to happen and we've tested it and it works, but the Switch isn't powerful enough to pull it off?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if that's how Nintendo works necessarily, right? Like, I feel like they will make something happen no matter what. Just making sure that they have the limitations to do it, and obviously they have, they work with the hardware, so it makes it a lot
like
easier.
How,
but
in that case, then how far from that original idea, in theory, did they have to move away from to make it work? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't know that much, honestly, because like what they've shown here is like, it seems
pretty damn
unbelievable. And also just like he fell off that thing and flew through the sky and landed seamlessly, no loading screen. It was all running.
That's kind of what made me
430.
think it was like, oh my god, I can't believe this is working. And
I
even
know.
at 30 frames per second, this is going to be incredible if it all plays out.
Exactly. And like, I mean, I believe that's the game, right? The game's about to come out. Like, he was just playing gameplay from it. It's not like they built a whole vertical slice just for this one presentation.
They're not exactly the kind of company that will play a thing through a PC in order to then show better footage. You know, they're going to be playing it on the Switch, obviously.
Yeah, so, it's on hardware. It's basically gold candidate. Anuma at the start of this thing was like, and development has finished. So, like, this is the game. It's done. So, I mean, you know, they've had a lot of time to optimize. I mean, the original game was built for Wii U originally, and then they used the Switch to kind of bring it up to a bit more powerful standards. So they are fundamentally building on the bones of a Wii U game. So there's probably a bit more wiggle room there, but it's still one of the most impressive games on the system, even to this day, having come out straight away. So I think that all that experience building on top of it feels like they're not kind of expanding things in a way like it's all physics stuff. It feels like is what they're doing, as opposed to anything that pushes technology further, right? In that sense. So I think that all of it looks great, and it's exciting. I think the marketing has still been weird for me. It's still like, what is going on? But I feel like I better understand the game now. I feel like going into it, there is a lot more potential for surprise here than with the first game, just because we know much less, I want to say.
Yeah,
so.
And I mean, these Sky Islands kind of feel like shrines, where they have like a bit of a linear kind of, you need to do X to get through this thing, like the raft. You need to build this raft to get from A to B, like, and there will be some reward at the end of the Sky Island, you would imagine. And surely there's only one clear entry to this Sky Island if it is linear, but that doesn't. I don't know. It says you very quickly run into hurdles where you're like, but what if you just entered the Sky Island another way? And how do they build the Sky Island in a way that? What if you started with that panel of water on the other side? Then whether I don't know. I'm making things up. But I'm making the point like, we still know so little about the structure, whereas Breath of the Wild was, I am looking for shrines. I need shrines to get more powerful. And then once I get more powerful, I move to the next area and I look for shrines and I get more powerful. Like, we don't know the gaming loop of this game still. And I think
we don't know the narrative either. That's
not
fundamental
that there was much
issue,
narrative in the first game, but
yeah. But like the framing, what's it going to be? What's the goal? Who are we killing? Probably Ganondorf, and he's probably underground or in the sky or whatever. She's probably in the floating Hyrule Castle, right? That would make sense.
So this was a fear I had after Mario Galaxy 2, I was like, where do you go with 3D platforming now? Like, what do
you went to space? Like, how do you go further
and then
than that?
Obviously 3D World came out, and that was a very safe kind of not boring in comparison to Galaxy 2 in terms of like innovation. But then Odyssey came out, and it was like, oh, like this is an alternate route for the 3D platformer in 2017 when it came out, obviously. And I kind of had that feeling after Breath of the Wild. I was like, where do you go from here? This game is reinventing open world games. What do you do next? And I do think what we've seen in this 10 minutes gives me enough confidence to say, okay, right, this is what you do in 2023 with a brand new style of open world game. And like, I can guarantee you in 7-8 years time, we're going to see vehicles and physics and a lot more like quirky shit like that in so many open world games, in the same way that Elden Ring is so inspired by so much of Breath of the Wild. You know, like I think it's clear from that 10 minutes of gameplay we have a rough idea of partially what the next lineage of open world looks like.
Yeah, I think systemic stuff, right? Like, that's the thing that Elden Ring doesn't actually lean into at all. And Elden Ring is much more focused on exploration and kind of like
Combat.
Combat, obviously. But like, the one thing for me that doesn't make it as great as Breath of the Wild is it's not systemic in the same way. Like,
No.
Breath of the Wild is built on fundamental interactions between weather systems and chemicals and physical systems, right? And there's small, tiny amounts of that in Elden Ring. I think I sent you an image of like, oh, in Elden Ring, if you are using a fire spell in the rain, it will do slightly less damage. Like, they have some
minor
considerations there,
very,
very minor, but like, it's not the same systemic kind of approach, the kind of like immersive sim style approach that Zelda is taking, essentially. So
it's actually really interesting because Elden Ring, in my opinion, is all about your character getting more powerful, and the amount of power you have is directly correlating to defeating tougher, stronger, more numerous enemies. Breath of the Wild is all about two things: increasing your stamina wheel and increasing your hearts. Obviously, hearts relate to both exploration and combat, but that stamina wheel is all about exploration.
Absolutely.
Much. So I think that those are the biggest differences between Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring, is like exploration versus getting more powerful. And certainly seems like Tears of the Kingdom is leaning into the exploration above combat for sure, which is exciting.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Well, there are thoughts late, of course, but hey, Nintendo decided to, drop it while I was in Disneyland. Very rude of them. But, I understand.
They were so good with the previous Direct that we owed them one.
Yeah, totally. So there you go. That is our thoughts on the Tears of the Kingdom gameplay, and very short order, we will, I'm sure, be talking about the full game itself. But Bally, we have a very important matter to discuss. It's serious. It's tragic.
I couldn't believe your tweet when I read it. That was the first thing I read about this game.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I was very confused.
I regret to inform you and all of our audience that Sonic the Hedgehog is dead. He was murdered. The blood is on the floor. It's cold. And someone has to pay for this. Someone has to pay. So on April Fool's Day, Sega and Sonic, I think actually beforehand they were kind of teasing that like there's some bold new direction for Sonic, and then they dropped this trailer on April Fool's Day, and I'm like, oh, this is cool. They're making like a fun little joke, and they're like, Sonic is dead. I'm like, great. This is the kind of thing that the Sega social media team would do. Very opposite to what Nintendo. The very opposite of what Nintendo would ever do. Like, can you imagine Mario is dead? Never in a million years would Nintendo do that. However, Sega let them do it because Sega are wild and they'll do whatever. And I'm watching this trailer and I'm like, oh, that's cool. They made like kind of like a fake visual novel trailer and like stuff's going on and all this stuff. And I get to the end of the trailer and it's like, download now on Steam. I'm like, excuse me? Wait, what? And it turns out that they actually made a full video game. They made a full-blown visual novel in the style of like a Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney of Sonic and his friends on it's like Murder on the Orient Express. They're on a train.
Have Sega got visual novel experience? What are any other games they've worked on?
No, I mean, this is definitely in the style of something that Capcom would do, or something that's Spike Chunsoft.
I was just gonna say Phoenix Wright is obviously Capcom, right? So it's,
exactly,
it's all very different.
Yeah,
interesting.
But the obviously a lot of the influence is coming from there. And here's the wildest thing about it, because I was reading about this afterwards. I don't know if you were listening to the Kate and Krista show when Katie from Sega was on there, but she's the one who runs the Sonic the Hedgehog account, and obviously runs a lot of social stuff over there. This game was made by the social team at Sega. It was not made by a development studio. It was made by them, and they got some friends in and involved for like writing and programming, all that sort of stuff.
Are they US or Japan based?
The US based, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's US based. This is the thing I'm saying, like, Nintendo would never in a million years do this.
NOA, make a game.
Yeah,
Never.
exactly. And like they pitched it to Sega, and Sega were like, yeah, go ahead with it, see if you can do it. And she basically has a whole Twitter thread, I recommend reading through it, of like how they made this game and like the planning behind it and all that sort of stuff. But it was a social team that made this game, which is wild. And I think it's really fascinating because what I'm going to say, Bally, the murder of Sonic the Hedgehog is one of my favorite things I've played this year. I think it is fantastic. I think it is so fun, and I think it understands why people love Sonic the Hedgehog. And I think the real irony here is that the two best Sonic games that I've played in recent years are both essentially made by fans, right? When you look at the Sega social team,
Yes.
it's people who have, joined that company because they are fans of Sonic the Hedgehog and they want to work on it and they're very invested in the universe and everything. And then obviously you have the developers at Sega in Japan who are making all the new Sonic games, and you know how that goes, right? Like those games have never been well received. I think Sonic Frontiers has done better than a lot of recent ones.
Yeah, it definitely had some great reviews.
Yes, but I think that like Sonic Mania, obviously a game made basically by working with fans, right? A lot of it was the development done by a fan kind of development team, and this is somewhat similar in that way. And I think it shows a lot about like the fans kind of know what people want from Sonic the Hedgehog, and I don't think Sega really does. Or maybe they do because they greenlit this, but, you know, in all essence, this is still an April Fool's joke. And I've even seen a lot of people saying, like, it kind of sucks that visual novels get the short end of the stick when it comes to stuff like April Fool's Day, because a lot of companies will be like, hey, lol, we made a visual novel, this is our April Fool's joke, and it's just like a screenshot of, like, what a potential visual novel would look like for, I don't know, Overwatch or something. Overwatch actually did that for Valentine's Day. They made a whole visual novel thing for Valentine's Day, but yeah, it feels like it's weird because then these things go on and become extremely popular because, hey, guess what? There's a legitimate audience for visual novels, and they are people want them, and they are thirsting for them. They're very hungry for this kind of stuff, including their favorite properties. And this game has now been downloaded over 1 million times. So it's free on Steam, right? So you're not paying for it. It's free, and you can just download it. It's been downloaded over 1 million times and is now the 61st most highly reviewed game in Steam history. And that's in like a couple of days. And I think it speaks to the way that this thing really treats the franchise, and it treats the characters and has fun with it and is charming and is inoffensive in a lot of ways. I don't think this thing is like doing anything crazy or wild, but I think for a lot of people, for Sonic fans and Sega fans included, it just feels like it's respecting the universe and the material and all that stuff really well, while wrapping it up in something that is cute and colorful and just interesting. So basically the premise is that it's Amy Rose's birthday and they're all on a train, and it's a murder mystery party, right? And you know, the idea is that you're this kind of like, you can name your own character, but you're a brand new kind of Sonic character essentially, and you are someone who, you're basically the quote unquote chef, but by being the chef of the train, what that means is you basically just microwave food, because the only thing in the kitchen is a microwave. So whenever someone wants something, you just have to microwave it. So it's a funny premise to begin with, and basically what happens is that you know, the train starts going, the murder mystery starts, but something weird has happened, and then you get stuck in this room, and you know, you have a first kind of mystery that you solve, and it is very light touch in that you have an inventory and you can choose items from that, and you can say, I want to show this evidence right at this certain point, but it's very linear, so you know exactly, you know, when you need to show something and always what you need to show. And then it goes into this sequence when it's like, basically the very beginning, Tails is the detective, right? So everyone gets given a role on the train, like a kind of role that they're playing, and Tails is the detective, and you're basically his sidekick. So it's also kind of funny, right? Because Tails has always been the sidekick, but now he's the main detective and you're his sidekick. So there's a little bit of irony there. And Tails is like, well, you know, whenever I don't know what to do, I think, what would Sonic do? And then you're like, what would Sonic do? And then it pops up this little mini Game Gear, and it's called a Dream Gear. It's basically just a riff on the Game Gear, and it just pops up this Game Gear, and all of a sudden you're playing this little isometric Sonic thing where he's just running forward, and there are some spikes and stuff, and it's like kind of an angle, and you're just dodging left and right, collecting rings, and that's like the mini game of this essentially. So whenever you get into a situation where it's like, you basically have to play this little Sonic mini game where you collect a bunch of rings, jump over some spikes and stuff, and it actually gets kind of tricky towards the end. Actually, I was like having to do them a couple of times because I was like, fell down the hole.
From an action perspective.
From an action perspective, yeah. So you're just going left and right, jumping basically, and avoiding obstacles and collecting rings at the same time. And you have to collect a certain number of rings in order to pass the check, essentially, and get to the next bit of story. So you can actually turn that stuff off as well. It's got great accessibility settings of like, hey, just turn off falling in pits, or turn off like taking damage, that sort of stuff. So if you are someone who just wants to play the visual novel, then you can certainly do that. But I thought it was a fun little addition. And I think, you know, if they were to build this out a bit more, I think they would put more time and care into like the actual mystery solving element of it, because really it is just like, hey, this is, you know what to do, is kind of straightforward, and there's not a lot of thinking required. And the moments when you have to quote unquote think, you're playing a mini game instead of like solving the solution, right? Or like figuring out what evidence contradicts with which, and which to kind of place, that sort of stuff. So I think that it just has a lot of charm to it and humor, and the art is fantastic, and the music is also amazing. Like the soundtrack, I'm like bopping along to straight away, and is really, really good stuff. So I think it just, from a presentation standpoint, as a quote-unquote April Fool's Day joke of a video game, just stands head and shoulders above anything I've ever seen before. And like you clearly can see that the people who made this cared about it a lot and like wanted to deliver something to a quality level, to a polish level that frankly most Sonic games don't really have or see. And I think that, you know, it's only a couple of hours long, but within that kind of short span, it tells a kind of like mini story arc, and you know, you kind of get a lot of references as well. I actually was looking up online of like, what does this refer to? And it's like, oh, in Sonic Unleashed on the Xbox, here is what happened in this. There's this one place called Spatagonia or whatever, and like that gets referenced in this game, which I think is fun. And there are some characters in there. I think I knew most of them, but there was Vector, who's the crocodile guy, and Espio, who I think is. Actually not sure what Espio is. He's like a weird
chameleon?
Bird. I guess he's a chameleon, yeah. I think they originate from the Sonic at the Olympic Games, the Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, maybe?
They were in Sonic Heroes. I don't know if that...
Oh, were they in Sonic Heroes?
I want to say Olympic Games was after that, but I could be wrong.
It was, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think the first Olympic Games was a Wii game, right? Or was it a GameCube one? It was either Wii or GameCube. Can't remember which.
I think it was Wii.
But I'm pretty sure I was looking on Wikipedia, I'm pretty sure they're associated with those games in some aspect.
I think it was
anyway.
Beijing in 2008.
Ah, okay, right. So yeah, probably they're in those games as well, but I don't know if they originate from somewhere else. But those were the two ones I was less familiar with. Blaze the Cat's in here from Sonic Rush, as well as obviously Rouge and Shadow and Tails and Knuckles and everybody who you know, all the classics. Amy Rose, of course, and it's Amy Rose's birthday, so basically you're kind of like following behind her. You and Tails are like almost half step behind because the train conductor at the beginning gives her a key, and it's like, here's the birthday girl key, so you can unlock every door. And so she kind of gets ahead of you and starts investigating stuff before you do.
How dark does it get?
Not dark. It's very kind of like lighthearted in a lot of ways.
Okay.
Like I think that at the beginning it's like, oh, Sonic. I think he actually got hurt. Like it looks like it's not actually acting. Like he's basically lying on the ground unconscious, and you're like, what happened here? And they're like, anyway, he should be fine. Moving on. And then you know stuff gets revealed later on and stuff like that. It does not lean into that stuff at all. And I think that it just like uses it for humor, and it is very lighthearted. And yeah, you can play this as a 5-year-old and be totally cool, right? Like I don't think there's anything harmful about it at all.
Do you think they'll get the green light to do some more?
I really hope so. I mean, I think this is such a great idea, and I think the reception it has got, like, clearly Sega should be paying attention to this reception, because a lot of people are in love with this thing, and for good reason, because it's made to such a high level of quality, and I think that, yeah, as a piece of, like, official material, it respects Sonic and everything about it, like, really, really well, so I hope that it does get a bit more attention from them, and then hopefully leads to something that is a bit more full length, and then they can put it out and actually, you know, charge money for it and make it a full playable visual novel, and I think that would be an amazing thing for them to do, and kind of like jump off of the success of this thing to make a whole kind of branch of more Sonic games that a wider audience can get into, or a different audience, I should say, because, you know, I like Sonic and I grew up playing Sonic, but I'm not the sort of person who's out there playing Sonic Frontiers day one, right? I might check it out at some point when it's like £5 in like 4 years time, but you know, that's not me. But you know, playing this, I'm like, hey, Sonic's kind of cool, actually. You know, there are some good Sonic games out there. I played Sonic Advance 2 last year. That was a nice kind of going back into the nostalgia. And I'm like, I need to go back and play Sonic Rush 2, because I only ever played the first Sonic Rush. And seeing Blaze the Cat in this game, I'm like, yeah, Blaze, she's cool. I remember playing as her in Sonic Rush. So how about I play the sequel to that? So I might load that up on my Steam Deck now. So this is actually, as a marketing tool, I think it's done its job, because it's got people interested in Sonic again, in a way that I don't know that a wider audience has been in a while. I think it's just good PR overall. Right, so yeah, I think they can do a lot with this thing. And I think the other thing they can do is just put it on consoles, right? I can imagine Nintendo announcing this in a presentation at some point, being like, "Hey, the Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog is now on Switch." I don't know.
And it's
Nintendo,
free.
yeah, it's free. Did Nintendo allow things with murder in the title on their eShop? I'm not sure, but Steam certainly does. So we'll see. It's all you know, tongue in cheek. So. I hope that it does come to console. Obviously, it's not at the moment, so you're gonna have to get it on a computer. But it's a visual novel, right? It's very light. You could probably run it on your Mac, Bally, right? Like
Okay.
If you have a laptop that is not great, you can probably still run this thing, I would say. So if you do want to check it out, it feels like it's quite accessible, and I think that it's a thing that definitely is worth playing. So
Nice.
go out there and go solve the murder of Sonic the Hedgehog. It's a good time.
Cool. Well, you said Sonic was kind of a bit more lighthearted. Well, let me tell you about a really dark game.
All right.
Because I'm still chipping away at Octopath Traveler 2.
How many hours in are you, Bally, at this point?
I am 45 and a half hours in.
Hot damn.
And according to my Switch playtime, I'm still behind Octopath Traveler 1. So
wow.
Apparently this game is longer than 1, so I still have a way to go. I think how long to beat has it, like 70 or 80 hours?
Really? For main story?
I think main story
80?
is like 65 or something.
Okay.
And then main plus extra is 80 or 70. And then completionist is like 90. So I'm probably going to end up close to the 70 mark. I can't really tell, to be honest. But yeah, I'm 45 and a half hours in. And the cool thing about this game is that one of my issues, I'll be honest, I did have some issues with the first game, and I like to think I was honest about these, but one of them was that because it was 4 chapters, there were points where the story became ridiculously predictable for certain arcs where you're like, right, well, there's only one more chapter because every single character has 4 chapters, and that means that the thing has to wrap up before this chapter, and that means that person is dead now. And it's like, okay, well, that happened, and that it's like very beat by beat. It's like, okay, right, I get it. Octopath Traveler 2 fixes that because the standard story length for a character is 5 chapters, not 4, and that's not including a handful of characters that have split paths. And so, for example, Throne has a split path. There's a character called Mother and a character called Father in Throne's arc, and she does something involving each of them in 2 different paths. Those paths get resolved, and then there are 2 more chapters beyond those paths ending. So, like, it just gives the characters and the stories a little more intrigue where, yes, something you might predict does get resolved, but then there's something darker and greater happening beyond that, and you think, what? And there's intrigue. It gives you a much more motivation to play, where there was definitely, yes, I beat all 8 character paths in the first game, but half of those paths I knew what was going to happen in the final chapter, and I also felt a little demotivated to do 8 final chapters in that sense, where I was like, right, well, I kind of know what's going to happen, and then beat by beat, whereas I'm kind of getting to the point where I'm meeting the resolution of the first kind of obvious thing that happens in a lot of these plot threads, but then there's the bigger, greater thing that's like lingering or dangling a carrot, and it's making me like, oh, what happens there? And it's really good. I will say 3 of the plot lines that I've reached so far, Throne, Oswald, and Cassidy, are really dark storytelling, like really messed up. And minor spoilers for like the opening of Oswald's chapter. I just want to talk about the opening of his chapter.
Sure, yeah, which you could have played in the demo.
And you've played this, but basically his home burns down and it's burnt down by like his
kind of like rival, right?
His rival is co-working like scholar. So in this world, scholars are like magic users. And yeah, he burned his home down and killed his wife and daughter. Yeah. And then falsely accused Oswald of starting the fire, and he went to like this prison on this island, and he's on a mission to like get revenge against this guy Harvey. Yeah. I'll just say that Oswald's story gets even darker than that opening. It's really messed up. It's like, wow. Like, you know, some really like impactful cutscenes that I experienced where I was left like pretty shocked by what was happening. Likewise, Cassidy's story, I was really like, oh God, like, is that what's really happening? And that's not to say there are still some weaker stories that are very predictable and very positive in like contrast to these 3 darker ones I've mentioned. And they're really nice to play. It's not just all doom and gloom. But judging from reviews, people have said like these stories do come together in a satisfying way, and I'm not seeing clearly how that's happening yet, but I'm getting the feeling like it will happen, and I'm very, very excited about that. I'm still more engaged with these characters than I was with the first game. The battle system's almost identical. There's very minor changes, but I am still absolutely loving it. yes, you ultimately do the same thing each battle. It is about breaking your foe and powering up a character as powerful as possible, and then doing a hefty ton of damage. But I think this game is very strong in really changing the ways that you get to that point. It really forces you to think outside the box. Like, crap, this guy needs revived. This other guy's like running out of SP. How do I get my party into a position where I'm strong enough to now like break this enemy and then, you know, win the match? And like so many bosses have other enemies like that you basically have to defeat the minions in order to even do damage to the big boss, or the big boss might get into a frenzy and starts attacking like mad, and you're just trying to survive through these periods. But then if you manage to survive that period, it then goes for like quarter of the match without even attacking you, and you then have an opportunity to rack up damage and eventually kill them. So like the bosses, I do think, are actually kind of stronger than the first game and a little bit more varied, and I would say very tough. I'm always meeting that challenge where it will always suggest what level you should be to face a boss. So say I think the last chapter I did, it recommended like level 36. So I had one character that was like level 32. I had two characters that were like level 40, 41, and I had one character that was like 30, I don't know, 4. And I still struggled. Like, even with that balance of some characters above the level and some below, it's still tough. So it's a tough game. I'm still really enjoying it, and it's a real step up on the first game, honestly, and that's predominantly, in my opinion, due to just structure and narrative. It's still very beat by beat, a lot of it, but less so than the first game.
Now, hearing that worries me a little bit, saying like there's an 8-level gap at least between some of your characters. How has that been in terms of grinding? Are you doing a lot in between these chapters? You find yourself going off the beaten path to find classes and do like hidden dungeons and stuff like that to kind of get yourself to level?
I'm not looking for hidden dungeons. There are kind of like, no, not dungeons. They're kind of like crypts, I guess. I don't know what you can call it, like caves where you will discover an ability and you just go to that cave, and if you have the right character in your party, you will get to the ability, and those are worth getting. They don't take a ton of exploration to find. I had to look up maybe a couple. Am I grinding? I am leaning more towards doing a little bit of grinding here and there. It's like I said before, enemies are tougher at night, and you can change between day and night. So you can go to a route that is tough and then turn it to night, and the enemies are even tougher. And as long as you're surviving and defeating them, you will gain a lot of XP very quickly. Like I said also before, you can speed up battles a bit.
Right.
If you just mainline the game, and you have, say you've got a party of 3, and you have one spot that rotates for like story reasons. I feel like in the first game, I was getting through battles, like keeping that 4th character alive a bit better than this game. I feel like if you want to get through with a much weaker party member, I do think it is tougher in this game potentially. And that does mean that you will have to mix up your party more. And by mixing up your party more, it means that the highest level of some of your party is lower than it would otherwise be. Like, I think it's better having your lowest level higher than having your highest level even higher, if that makes sense. Like, rather than be like, oh, I've got this really powerful, so I've got like Temenos, he's like my cleric / scholar. He like does the whole shebang. He's a high level, and that helps, but it's more helpful to the party that your weakest member is like close enough to the recommended level.
Because more likely the lowest level character will get knocked out quickly, and then you'll just spend a lot of turns reviving them constantly.
Exactly. So. And I do think the enemies are quite smart at picking on the weakest character.
Okay.
They will hammer them into the ground. And yeah, you do not want to be fighting these bosses with 3 characters. You definitely want all 4 working in synergy. And it's tough. It is a tough game. You probably can do it with no grinding. I would probably encourage exploring a bit, but at the same time, I don't think the side quests are interesting. Like I said last time, I just don't think they're great. I'd rather just sit listening to a podcast, walking back and forth a bit, just fighting a few tough enemies and getting level up. I'd rather do that than do the side quests, honestly, and then go to the next chapter. Yeah,
which to me says like not much has changed in terms of my annoyances with the first game, which is a little frustrating.
Yeah, and I'm not going to try and paint it differently for sure, because if you want to have a good shot at every single boss and not be underleveled, I think you do need to play it right. And because ultimately what happens is there's some once you've gone to a town, you can just warp back to that town. So then if the next chapter is in a town you've already been to, you can just warp to it and go straight into it. But the level gap between the chapter you've just done and the chapter you're about to do might be 3 levels. And you're like, right, so where am I going to get these 3 levels from? You could manually just walk to that next town and you will probably level up 3 levels, and that's a decent way. But if you're going to warp there, you do, like, the levels do progress, and I don't think the amount of XP you get from defeating a big boss will level you up 3 levels in time for the next boss. Plus, you're going to have to rotate one member of your party likely, because you constantly need the relevant character for each relevant chapter. So I think that if that was your biggest issue with the first game, I don't think it's changed a lot in that sense, to be honest.
And these kind of like side, like additional quests with multiple characters, tell me a bit more about those, because that feels like something that they changed for this game, and something that potentially could have alleviated issues with lack of party dynamics and that sort of stuff. So how have those been going? Yeah,
I was telling you about these off mic. They're very disappointing in the end, because there seems to only be 4, and that's 4 to cover the basis of all 8 characters, because each one uses 2 characters, and I need to look it up. Maybe there's more than 4, but from what they are so far, they have been really good. They are really flavorful in terms of like character relationships, and you still have like these random character interactions where it'll say like, it just gives you like a prompt mid chapter, and the characters will have like a little chat, and those discussions are good. Like they're worth it, but they're far from like your party feeling like a cohesive group, to be honest. And at the same time, I don't know how they would do that better. I mean, I know how they do that better, to be honest. They'd have more joint character chapters that link thoroughly to the story. But then the game would also be an extra 30 hours long, so maybe they didn't want it to go that wild. And I really do appreciate what they've done with the standard chapter structure, where they have branching paths. And whenever I say branching paths, by the way, you do both branches. You don't pick a branch. And then the resolutions, I think, are just so much stronger that I think having to do all those extra chapters would make the game even longer. And if they're so determined to stick with having 8 characters, it's not really possible. But I would have liked to have seen something better in that area.
Yeah, I think that's something that, in all honesty, I don't think it was like the worst thing about the first game. For me, the problems with the first game were far more tied to just wasting my time as opposed to anything else. And so like I think that it's nice that they've kind of added it as kind of a make good.
Yeah.
And hopefully, from what you're saying, like the ends of these stories seem to be maybe coalescing a bit more, or at least having some more open-endedness to them, so that they could coalesce into something more final that then ties everything together a bit more cleanly. So it feels like even in the main story, they're kind of moving a bit more towards that, even if they don't have as many side chapters to kind of help
totally.
You get there.
And there's a handful of jobs that I've not got yet that I hear are incredibly good and incredibly powerful, and very minor spoilers, so just a warning for 30 seconds, but you do get a boat in this game, and you can use that boat to explore. I did some vague exploring with the boat, and I was underleveled for it, so it's clearly like a late game thing to do, and I think that exploration links to a lot of end game stuff and this sort of thing. So I've got all that to look forward to as well.
Yeah, I can't remember if the first game had fast travel. Does this one have it? Can you get around the world easily, or is it much more about just running place to place?
Yep, you can just warp to any town you've been to before.
Great.
And I think the first game had that too.
Yeah.
But like I was saying, in some ways that's a curse, not a blessing, because the next town you go to might be 3 levels higher than the last story chapter, and then you're left like, right, well, how do I do this? And interestingly, I can't remember the podcast this was on, but my understanding is that the developers created a world, wrote stories for locations, and then built an overarching story around that. And maybe that's why some of these stories feel a little more grounded, is that like the story was written for the town before they even attributed it to the wider story or a character, which I don't know. I don't know enough about story writing and whether that's a good idea or not, but I'm enjoying the story a lot.
That's good. I still am at an arm's length with this, and like some things you said today have made me be like, oh, I should play it, and then other things have been like, I don't want to play it.
I think if you did play this, you'd agree with me on some things that yes, they are improvements on the first game, but you'd also agree with me that like in other aspects, the game is not changed from the first game. So I think you'd have a mixed time with this game, but hopefully the good would outweigh the bad. I don't know.
Yeah, there's so many like long games that I'm interested in playing because Like a Dragon and this came out in the same month,
Right.
like very close to each other, and I've not got to either of them, and some of that is just like travel timing, and some of that is me trying to be a bit better about not just jumping on stuff straight away day one. It's good. I'm glad you're really enjoying it because it feels like this is a game made for fans of the first game, and it seems like it's delivering on that quite strongly.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah,
it's good. It's long. I will give it credit that it's incredibly easy to just pick up and play some, and there's very little aimless wandering in Octopath. Like it's very much a paint by numbers. Go here, do the thing, fight the boss, and that, I will also give the game credit. Like there's a lot of chapters without a final boss, which I really like. Like that's fresh. I don't like this idea that, and maybe that works well with having the extra chapters. It's not every character has an extra chapter, therefore they have an extra boss. It's a bit more, tailored to that character, which I like a lot. So it's good stuff. I'm not going to say I'm going to beat the game for next time, but I'll be a bit further. We'll see.
Yeah, that's good. So I was going to talk about another game here, but we have spent a long time on this episode, so I think I'm going to park it. But I will mention that I am playing 999, the fabled visual novel from Kotaro Uchikoshi and his studio, and it's a game that I have been hearing about for literal, not quite decades yet, plural, but almost 2 decades. Like, I think I first heard James Jones talk about this game on DS, on RFN, about 15 years ago. So, like, if we're talking about backlog, like, this is, like, one of the most backlog games of all time. And, like, since that time, I have got very deep into visual novels, like, obviously, all the Ace Attorney games, which I was into back then, but I've played a lot more since, as well as Danganronpa, as well as AI The Somnium Files, both games, which are also Uchikoshi games. And there are some similarities, obviously, between 999 and the AI The Somnium Files. One of which I want to call out now, which is that the sound effect that happens, like when you go into a Somnium in AI The Somnium Files, it will do like a trigger sound that shows like all the different locks that you have to unlock within a memory. And when you enter an escape room in 999, the sound is exactly the same. It's very cool to see that sound design has just been carried forward from this original DS game all the way through to the most recent release in his kind of visual novel oeuvre, which came out last year. So I appreciate that about it. But yeah, I'll have a lot to say about 999 next time. I'm very close to the end, I think, of the true end, because I've done 3 endings up to this point, and I haven't really pulled back the layers, but I was playing it a lot today, and I played it about an hour before we started recording as well, and like in that last hour or so, a lot of story developments have happened to push me to the point where I'm like, okay, maybe it's better that I actually just finish this and then kind of go all the way in on it and talk all the way through it, because it's a cool game, and there's ups and downs to it for sure, but I think I'll get more in depth in it next time. But I look forward to, because I know a lot of people in our Discord are fans of these games, and been meaning to get around to them for a long time, so I finally have, and I will be checking in with that stuff next time, so I look forward to it. But before that, we have another segment of this show to go, which is of course emails from you, so don't go anywhere. After the break, we'll come back and talk about all the emails that you've sent to us and answer those questions. See you in a bit.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the show. It's time for the second segment and we've not done them in a while, but we're going to do some emails. If you have an email that you would like to send into the show, please email ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That's ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. We also have a channel on our Discord server. It is called Emails. You can put your questions, your comments in there, and we'll also cover those on the show. Our first email is from Benny, who is from Sweden, and says, "Hey guys, love the podcast and it was great fun hearing you test each other in video game music. Here's to my questions. Besides music from video games, what type of music do you listen to?" That's question number 1. Question number 2, what's your favorite Beatles album and why? And question number 3, what's your top 3 albums of all time? Cheers, Benny.
Thanks, Benny. It's music is something that's very interesting with you and I, Bally, that we, I think, grew up with a lot of similar music taste and were very into music for long periods of time. The reason I play guitar is because of Guitar Hero as well, which is a fun crossover thing. And you played piano for a long time. Yeah, I played
piano and clarinet growing up to kind of grade 3 level, so not particularly high, but I enjoyed it for the time being, but always something I wish I'd pursued harder, but maybe just didn't get that much satisfaction out of it as I got older.
And I tried to learn piano back at school, and I was like, my teacher was terrible. I just fucking hated her. So that was the main issue there. But in terms of music, like in our adult years, I think has just kind of fallen off a cliff. I think like this is probably true for some people, and I think it depends on like what thing you're into, right? Whereas like games, I keep up on everything and I'm very much into it. Books, I basically only read like big fancy things and don't read anything else. And music is one of those things where it's like my taste just basically stopped at the age of 18 and has not changed since. And I haven't really found that much music since that age that I have really found myself latching onto or getting into. Like my taste was very specified of what I like, and that was it. And then I just kind of stopped. And I think the advent of podcasts as well changed my habits, whereas I would used to listen to music walking places or on buses or on, planes or whatever. And anytime I'm walking around listening to anything now, it's always a podcast. So I just don't have access to it. And I think also one of the things that happened with music is we used to have like collections, right? We used to have CDs and load them up onto our iTunes library.
Libraries, like we were proud of our music collections and listened to them frequently.
And I think one of the issues that I came across was like back when I had phones, like the last 10 years or so, phones have never had great like storage capacity for memory in terms of like holding a bunch of music. And I'm the sort of person who wants to have all of my music in one place, right? Collated so that I can call upon whichever thing I want to listen to at whatever time. And like during that transition as well, I think Spotify just kind of became a thing. And you're in this space now where you have to like pay a subscription fee to get music constantly. But also the problem is this, it's internet focused. And so if you do want to just be out somewhere, you either have to use your data to listen to it, or you have to already previously have downloaded stuff. And then back to the problem of like phones not having enough memory. Like I want something that has like at least 100 gigs free to like have every single piece of music that I want, right? And so it felt, I think it's kind of like a mix of weird technology stuff along with my kind of like habits falling off that made things kind of disappear for a while. I don't know if that's kind of true for you as well.
Yeah, I'm more or less the same. Built up, like I got into music quite late, I must admit. Like I only listened to basically Queen and Elton John up until the age of about I don't know, 12, 13, honestly. And then,
and what's that guy who was on American Idol that one time?
Darius.
Yeah, well, shout out to Darius, of course. But there was some other guy.
American Idol.
Yeah, or no, Pop Idol or whatever it was.
Oh, Will Young, Gareth
was
Gates.
them as well. But wasn't there like Paul Potts was the guy from Britain's Talent.
Paul Walker.
Paul Weller?
Paul Weller, yeah.
That guy, yeah, whoever he was.
Just some single that I had, and yeah, you've remembered him.
I just remember Paul Weller being in your room for some fucking reason. But that's
so yeah, really awful music. Well, Queen is not awful. I absolutely love Queen. No. But yeah, just massively got into loads of bands at school, really, through influential friends, including yourself, MBZ, and then uni definitely kept that train going, and then podcasts, doing our podcast, getting more invested in video games, life getting in the way, just everything. A lot of our favorite bands stopping putting out albums we enjoyed was maybe one factor, but all these factors combined, completely dropped off. I maybe listened to a handful of songs every 3 weeks or so, and I'll just be on my laptop on Spotify or something and be like, let's listen to a little bit of this, or Alter Bridge have a new album, let's listen to a bit of that, this, that, and the other. And massively dropped off, barely listen to anything. I'm all video games, I'm all podcasts, and very little else.
Yeah, I always get embarrassed at the end of the year where Spotify do their Wrapped thing and everyone's like, I listen, like my sister sends me hers and she's like, I've listened to 900,000 minutes of music this year. And I'm like, cool, I listened to like 12 and it was this one band that I've just kept listening to for the last 4 years. And that's the only thing that's changed basically. So I feel like I do a lot of like I was talking to you before we started recording, I tend to go down like rabbit holes on YouTube every once in a while. So it'll be like one evening randomly, it will be like 6 o'clock and I'll just be on YouTube and it will suddenly be 11 p.m. because I've just gone down a music rabbit hole where like, you know, I find like a song that I remember from a band that I liked and then I just go watch a bunch of covers of it. And I'm like watching a bunch of like interviews and stuff like that. And then eventually it's like, oh shit, I've spent a lot of time just like sitting here in this weird bubble, just reminiscing basically about kind of older music and stuff like that I was very into. And I have tried, you know, like my sister's very good at this about like finding new music and new artists she likes a lot through Spotify. It feels like Spotify is like a big discovery platform these days to just find new music that you're into. But I feel like the type of music we're into just doesn't really get made anymore. So I think it's hard to like have that stuff you know, happen. And I do the same thing with game music as well, right? Where I will also go down rabbit holes of like, oh, I'm, you know, it's a Tuesday, let's listen to some Xenoblade music. That tends to happen a lot, where I'm just like, yeah, let's just go and find a bunch of stuff. And the thing that I think a lot of people have opinions of like reaction content on the internet, but one of the things that I do like is that the nice thing about it is you get kind of fresh perspectives on things that you already know and love, and so it's cool to see like a new person being like, I'm listening to this song from Xenoblade for the first time, right? Like I like that kind of content out there because it validates and reaffirms your love of a thing when a new person comes in and is like, this is good actually. So yeah, I do actually like that YouTube has kind of got a lot of that stuff. It's always like music teacher reacts to this, and yeah, I don't know, that stuff is clickbait kind of, but it works. I think the content is good, so I don't know if it is clickbait because I click it and I enjoy it. So yeah. Anyway, I don't know where I was really going with that, but yeah, what type of music do we listen to, Bally? What kind of things do you want to shout out?
Definitely rock and different variations of rock. For me,
rock is kind of a central pillar with like spokes going out from it. Yeah.
I do enjoy on the side, obviously, video game music, but like Disney music and there's a lot of pop songs I like, but it's not none of these things I listen to consistently. Well, I don't listen to anything consistently at the moment, but like rock music is the basis for everything. Now that's sometimes everything from metal and like Avenged Sevenfold to more bluesy stuff like the White Stripes, and so, but then also like very mainstream like Foo Fighters, Green Day, but I also love Nirvana, like Muse, like loads of bands, Alter Bridge, like loads of bands, honestly. So just kind of all the things that they do and more.
Yeah, and mine's very similar. I mean, I go in slightly different directions. Like, I think really when it comes down to it, as we talked about, Guitar Hero shaped my taste in music a lot. And so if you go and look at the track list for Guitar Hero 3, there's like, oh, clearly you got into Metallica because of this, and Paramore was on here, and Dragon Force at one point. I haven't listened to Dragon Force in years, but I did get deep into Dragon Force as a result of Guitar Hero 3. So like, yeah, things like that. I'm much more, I would say, pop punky as well. Like I like Panic at the Disco a huge amount, of Fall Out Boy, and certain songs from My Chemical Romance. I never got deep into My Chemical Romance, but they have some
like
good
pop
stuff.
Punk, but I'm a way bigger like Blink-182 fan than you.
You're more of a classic-y, not classic punk, but like slightly different punk. I'm more emo pop punk, and you're more like punk pop punk.
You like the more whiny stuff.
Yeah, I like more whiny. I am into whiny stuff. Yeah, definitely. Paramore and Panic are big ones for me. So yeah, I think I do like other stuff as well, more classic stuff that my dad kind of got me into. So things like I don't know, like Thin Lizzy is one, I guess, kind of I got into like sideways through him, because also Charlie, I think, got me a Thin Lizzy album, and I think I got deep into it as a result of that.
Oh, nice.
And so they're one that's a big influence. Also, I think because Metallica mentioned them a bunch of times, like James Hetfield was like, oh yeah, Thin Lizzy's like a big influence on me. So I was like, well, I should probably listen to the thing that influenced Metallica. So that's how I got into them. There's some other classics. I also grew up listening to a lot of Queen as well, right? So we're similar in that way. And I think that there's a lot of stuff I have a lot of appreciation for in the kind of classic rock world, but I would say I gravitate generally much more towards, I think we both are like this, but melody is king for me. Like, I always will want a song that is more melodic, which is why screamo stuff just can't work ever in my brain. I just can't do it. Like, it annoys the shit out of me, and like I cannot handle it. There are certain bands like Disturbed who are not really screamo, but they have like elements of that in their songs. But like Down with the Sickness is a banger, right? Like there is a melodic through line to that song that, like, even if it has the ooh ah 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 stuff, like I kind of dig that stuff. Like that's not full kind of screamo. I'm talking more like just people who are just, the whole song is just like rah 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 whatever, which I can't. Like, I just don't find that musical personally, so that's why I have trouble with it. But anything that has a core, strong melodic line, I'm going to be into, and also anything that's kind of minor key kind of like sad shit. Like I think that works for me as well, and I think a lot of the stuff we're into kind of falls into those categories. But it depends. Question number 2 here is interesting because I think. Because I don't know. Here's the thing about it. I actually went on YouTube and I was like, what are Beatles songs? Because, like, I don't know. I feel like they're the kind of songs that, like, exist in pop culture so deeply and so ingrained that I'm like, yeah, I probably do like a bunch of these, but I just don't really know that I like them, or I don't know that they are Beatles songs. Like, I went on YouTube and I was like, Help? Okay, I think I know what that is. So I clicked on it. I was like, oh, I know this song. Yeah, this is a really good song. So, like, I'm aware of Beatles stuff, and I know the impact they've had on pop culture. Am I ever going to sit down and listen to Beatles stuff? Like, no, like, never. I don't think ever. And I know that's, like, blasphemous because they're supposed to be, like, the most universal band in the universe. I think they probably are, right? Like, a lot of their songs and music, like, have impacted the world on such a wide scale. But, like, I don't really give a shit about the Beatles.
Totally
I'm sorry. I don't.
It's like... First of all, do I have a favorite Beatles album? No. Why? Because I can't name any albums.
No.
The few I had some Beatles greatest hits when I was younger and listened to a bit of that. And honestly, my opinion is like, right, look at the NES, right?
Mm-hmm.
The NES.
Yeah.
Incredibly important system.
So important.
Do I want to play NES games? Not really. Are there a couple that are pretty good that I've enjoyed? Yes. But generally speaking, I don't want to play NES games. The Beatles are like The Legend of Zelda on NES.
Wow, okay, right? Here we go.
Hugely influential. Arguably the reason Breath of the Wild exists. Hugely important for the video game industry. Do I want to play The Legend of Zelda on NES? No, I don't. Do I want to listen to the Beatles? No. Okay? Harsh? Am I being overly harsh here? But, like, I'm just... Yes, they inspired so much. I cannot deny any of this. But the idea that, like, I will sit down and enjoy the Beatles, it's just too... casual and not my scene at all. I need something a bit heavier. Now, there's loads of bands that are lighter that I prefer to the Beatles.
Yeah, totally.
So that's maybe an unfair criticism, but they're just not my style in the slightest. So sorry, Beatles fans.
What's held up better, Bally? The Legend of Zelda or the Beatles? I think the Beatles, quite clearly, honestly. Like, I think...
what, in my opinion, or like the world's opinion? Or I don't know.
No, yeah, I mean, I think in every opinion, the Beatles has held up better than The Legend of Zelda, the NES game. Yeah, I think so. Like, obviously.
I guess,
but,
true.
But, yeah, I mean, I went through YouTube today and was like, what are Beatles songs? And everyone I clicked on, I was like, oh, I know that, but I didn't know it was a Beatles song. I think, like, that's the problem, is they're so ingrained into pop culture. They're so, like, a foundational bedrock that, like, it almost becomes boring because you just know it. Like, it's oh yeah, that's a really good song. And like, there's I have an almost intellectual approach to the Beatles as opposed to like an enjoyment approach.
Here's another really awful take, but
okay,
like,
here we go.
How much of the Beatles are hyped because of the hype at the time? You know what I mean?
Oh, sure.
Like, here's another video game analogy.
All right.
It's like the Wii, hugely hyped at the time, but like how much of Wii's history is preserved in history because of system sales and how obsessed people were with Wii Sports versus its wider software sales, which are kind of atrocious, like how much of the Beatles is famous because they were just so insanely big, especially in the United States and the UK, versus like the actual melodic structures of their songs and the impact that had on music. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they're pretty, wildly influential. Like, Let It Be. That's a song. Everyone knows that song, right? Like, I like that song, but it's not like I won't get deeply emotionally invested in Beatles music. And I think that might be the thing. Is like for me, music is like an emotional thing in a lot of ways. And I don't have a deep emotional investment. Like they're the type of song where you walk into a supermarket and it's on in the background. And I know that's very mean, but I mean like there is a
have we got any listeners left after?
I don't think so. But like it is a type of music that kind of rolls off my back, if you know what I mean, right? Like I know it's there, I know it exists, it happens. Like I don't know about it. I'm kind of surprised you don't like the Beatles because they are basically vanilla ice cream, right? In a lot of ways. So like it feels like they're great.
I was listening to some podcast a while back. I can't remember which one, and they were listing off things that you're just not allowed to not like. And the two things they gave in as example were the show Friends.
Yeah,
and the other one was Strawberries.
Okay, Strawberries?
Yeah,
Strawberries.
You're not allowed to not like Strawberries. And I'd actually throw the Beatles in there as well. I think it's like considered it's quite rebellious to not like the Beatles. It's quite, it's a bit out there. It's a bit, you think you're so smart not liking the Beatles, eh?
Yeah, exactly.
But that's just the way we are.
It's a universal thing, right? It's also, I think, important to say is like the Beatles existed in a place when monoculture was happening, right?
Massively.
And like,
good point, yeah.
Monoculture doesn't really happen anymore.
No.
Like, it kind of does. There's bubbles of it, but it's just, I think during that era, there was such limited access to media, right? Like, we have everything these days at our fingertips. Whatever you want to get into deep shit wise, you can do that.
The whole society's broken up into like boomers, Gen Z, Gen X, millennials, and all four segments will have incredibly different ways they spend their evenings versus 50 years ago where everyone's watching the same show.
Exactly, because that's all you had was the radio and the same 5 channels, right? So you would have absorbed the Beatles and they would have been the culture, right? And so outside of that, I think like, I don't know, if the Beatles rolled up today, like, and were a new band, what's the impact they have? That's a fascinating question, I think. But you can't really do it because they influenced like everything that came after them. Mario 64
came out. God, with the video game analogies here, but like, Mario 64 comes out today. What's its impact? But I don't know.
So there you go.
If you're still listening, shall we get to the third?
Somehow, if you're one of the 2 people who didn't just throw your podcast machine in disgust.
Really sorry to Beatles fans out there, but we just got honest takes here. That's what we're going to say. MBZ,
we just have honesty. Yeah. Hello.
3 favorite albums.
3 favorite albums.
3's a very small number.
It is a small one, yeah. But I think I had to go with my heart, like the ones that really spoke to me personally. And I think like the one that has to be on there is American Idiot. Like it's Green Day's like second like breakthrough album, right? Because they, with Basket Case and stuff back in the day, and Dookie, the original kind of breakthrough album for them, that was like the thing that got them on the map. But I think American Idiot was their like even more big mainstream play. And the thing I love about American Idiot is it's just like it's cohesive as an album, right? When I think album, I think like back to front, like there's something happening here musically that is synergistic, that makes sense, that kind of fits together, like, and it's like narrative as well. And I'm less interested in that stuff. I think both of us are, I don't know, I just don't really listen to lyrics that well, or at least I'm really bad. My sister is amazing at this, where she'll hear a song once and she can then like tell you every lyric to that song like the second time through, and I have no fucking idea how she does it, but it's like a superpower, and I just don't have that. I will listen to a song for like 6 years and still not know what the lyrics are, right? Like it's just not how my brain works. My brain latches onto melody, like I said, and like musicality. And I think even not really caring about like the political message of American Idiot or any of that stuff, I think melodically and musically it tells a story through that stuff enough for me to like latch on to everything within it. I love that album.
It is absolutely beautiful, like pop rock melodies and just some And I like the messaging. It's a very simple message, arguably.
Oh, sure,
but,
yeah.
the whole Iraq War and things, it really
Yeah.
hit a vibe. And I'm not saying I was even aware of American Idiot existing during the Iraq War. I got into it way later because I was just very slow with all these things. But yeah, it's great.
I think it's also a great example of an album that has like banger pop punk hits that you can like, that are like chart toppers, alongside like songs that are like so kind of deep cut but still fantastic. Like I think every single song on that album has its purpose and is a banger for one reason or another. Like What's Her Name is like one of my favorite Green Day songs, right? And like not many people know that song, but it's like one of the best ones on American Idiot. So that's for me one of my favorites. Do you want to jump in with one, Bally?
I'll jump in. Weezer's Pinkerton.
Ooh.
Weezer are like, they're my heart and soul in the way that they are the nerdy / cool / university educated nerds that are really into like games and represent like me and everything that I'm into and like my way of life. They even dress like me. They even like, I'm sure they're into the same drinks as me and all the, like, they just, like, Rivers Cuomo is just like me in an alternate reality. And I think a lot of Weezer's fan base can obviously relate massively to them, but the way that their lyrics and the way their sound is just so everyone talks about Weezer where their early albums are obviously better than their later albums. I still like a lot of their later albums, especially like even like the White Album as late as 2018, 19, I think it was. I can't remember. But Pinkerton and the Blue Album before it, but like Pinkerton especially is just, it's very raw, but it's got like, it's just Weezer at their most raw and believable, arguably, where they might have gone off the rails a bit later in life. I just think that Pinkerton is such a... It's really hard talking about music, isn't it? But
yeah, man, I would not want to do a music podcast. It's one of those things where I'm like, I love listening to music. I have no idea how the hell to talk about music.
Massive respect to people where they can like say stuff like, and this sounded very crunchy, and that sounded very flat. Well, not flat. I obviously know what flat means, but like...
And then they're using their head voice and the nasal and stuff like that.
And I'm just like, yeah, Pinkerton's a great album. And
it's just a fucking banger, mate.
It's just, anyway, I love Pinkerton. I'm going to end it there.
Great, fantastic. I think one of the first albums that I like latched onto as like, this is my thing, was Panic at the Disco's debut album, A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, which is like, it is such a weird album in terms of like the names of tracks and like the lyrics. Like, I think the thing with Panic at the Disco lyrics is like they seemingly make no sense at all, but like the way in which those words wrap around the music, like for me, is so perfect. It's like they didn't really think about what I'm sure they do mean something, but it's almost like the words flow because of the way they wrote the kind of melodies of the song. And I think that's such a amazing thing. And that album is just back to front, like built into my brain, because it's one of those that I was in Ireland, I think, and the way I got into Panic at the Disco is very weird. It's very kind of associated with like early internet shit, where I was at a friend's house and they showed me this song, and it was, I think it was the first song on the album, and it was basically paired with a Dragon Ball Z like AMV, like, so like back in the day, right, I think AMV still exists, right, but on YouTube you would have these like anime music videos where people would cut scenes from an anime to an artist's song, right? That was very early YouTube, and I still think AMVs are, they still exist today. It's like one of the earliest forms of content creation on the internet, and that song associated with that Dragon Ball Z music video is like so fucking like burned into my brain, because I got home and I went onto YouTube and I listened to that song again and again and again. I got my sister into that song, and like Panic at the Disco, one of the bands that me and my sister like both very deeply into, because we were very young when we got into them, and that first album I have listened to countless number of times, and I don't know that many people have that association or attachment to it, but like I listen to that album back to front constantly, and it's one of those weird ones where I don't this is opposite to American Idiot, where I don't think any of these are like songs that you could put out as singles. Like they all feel, in the same way that album does, though, they all still feel so cohesive in the same tone and same vibe that everything's going for, and like every piece of that album is just like a part of my existence. So like I had to have that one on here. It's probably my number one favorite album of all time, if I'm honest. Like I think it's just so tied to that era and that point in my life. And yeah, I think Fever You Can't Sweat Out is like tremendous. And obviously they still had lots of big singles and hits from that album, but like yeah, every part of it just like speaks to me as a person. So
Nice.
yeah, that's one of mine as well.
Right, my next one is Blink-182, Enema of the State. This album's only 35 minutes long, and it just goes so hard. When did I get into this album? Like, yeah, it was definitely school, like later in school, and just like, it's just one of those albums where if have it in a certain mood, I'll just be like, right, I just need to listen to this album all the way through. It's one of those albums you can do it because it's 35 minutes long, but like, again, similar to like American Idiot, in my opinion, there's no weak songs. It just goes and goes and goes and goes, and I absolutely love it. I think that there's something about Blink-182 sound where you've got dual vocalists, which is I think it's quite rare amongst bands I like, and like this swapping between Tom DeLonge and Mark Hoppus, where they both have such distinct voices, and they do lead vocals basically on the alternating songs more or less throughout this album, combined with like Travis Barker's insane drums. It's just so different to a lot of the other rock and pop punk stuff I listen to. It's a lot more goofy, but they're still so serious about it, and the sound, when you actually break down their songs, are incredibly simple songs, but I think it's so much about the delivery, and even if they're singing about stupid shit, it just works in a silly, youthful way that Blink-182 are a good example of a band where as they get older, they're kind of running out of things to sing about because they were so great for singing about goofy teenage shit, and it's like, that's what this album was all about, and it just kind of worked in a way where I was definitely too old for a lot of the messaging when I was like getting into this album, but it still holds up as an album and definitely makes me feel more youthful, and I absolutely love it. Enema of the State.
I think that's part of the thing we're running into with these bands generally, the ones that we like, is that the type of music they make tends to be like kind of centered around youth in that way, and as soon as they get older, like they can't really do that anymore, and so like, you know, the direction that Paramore has gone in, for example, is like, cool, I still think their songs are good, but it's not for me anymore, right? Because they've grown out of that and they're grown into a different direction, but I still like that sound of what they used to do, and that's a tough thing, I think, and it's probably why we kind of fall off these bands, because they evolve, and we're like, nah, we just want you to stay the same because our taste is still locked in an 18-year-old's kind of like body. But yeah, I don't know what that says, but anyway, I think that's definitely the case. My last one is for a band who I think needs more plaudits in the world, and I spent the last hour on YouTube before recording just looking up stuff and like watching stuff and people reacting and all that sort of stuff. It's Alter Bridge, Bally, and of course I have to choose Blackbird. Blackbird is like it's my favorite
Alter Bridge album as well.
Yeah, it's like every song hits, and there's variety there as well. Like, you have stuff that goes extremely hard, like Ties That Bind, and then you have Watch Over You, which is like, it's probably like the quietest, like most melancholy, like it's an acoustic song. It's a song that works on a stage with Miles and a guitar and nothing else,
so
right?
Live it's soft the whole way through, but the album version is like a soft to loud song. Yeah, totally. Yeah. But
it is the type of like, it's like Green Day's Good Riddance, or like Metallica's Nothing Else Matters, right? It's their softer kind of like more like, I don't know, wider mainstream friendly song, but still an absolute banger, and still an absolute classic. And yeah, I think like songs like Wayward One as well are just like, they're just like, it's that end of album track that always gets me, like What's Her Name on American Idiot. Like I always like an end of album track that has like a bit of spice to it, you know, and that's what Wayward One feels like it is. Like, but Blackbird, for me, Blackbird might be one of my favorite songs of all time. Like that song is just like so rich in so many ways, and the way that it like goes through different phases, and like the build up to the solo Alone, all that stuff. Blackbird's incredible song, an amazing album, and more people need to recognize the god voice that is Miles Kennedy, because holy shit, that dude has a range. Like, talk about vocal range. I don't think there is anyone in rock who has a greater, like, more robust vocal range than Miles Kennedy. His voice is outstanding, and I was just telling you about, there's a song that they did on AB3, their third album, called Words Darken Their Wings, where Mark Tremonti, who also in the band, formerly of Creed, which that's another thing I could go into my music taste of, like, I was very into Nickelback and Creed, so judge me all you want. Like, here's me.
Don't like the Beatles. Love Creed. Love
hating
Nickelback.
The Beatles, but shout out to Creed, basically. That's where I'm at, so all your hate mail, address it to me on Twitter. But anyway, Mark Tremonti also, formerly of Creed, and that's how Alter Bridge kind of was birthed from Creed. Obviously, Creed imploded, and Alter Bridge came out of that. And in this song, like, he and Miles both sing kind of dueling vocals. But there's a note at the end of this song that is, like, extremely high, and there's a performance of them doing this at the Royal Albert Hall, and Miles takes this note and fucking belts this thing, like, absolutely, like, there's vibrato on it. It's, like, fucking insane. Like, this dude just takes this note that is, like, impossible and, like, sings it with the kind of conviction and vigor of someone who's like, yeah, I can just nail this every time, right? Like, and it is unbelievably impressive, and yeah, I think that more people need the good word of Miles Kennedy, because that dude is a god, absolute insane vocalist. Not to put anything off of people like Brendan Urie, because I also think Brendan Urie is, like, a stunning vocalist from Panic at the Disco. So that's usually what I go for, is, like, people who are exceptional vocalists as well, who can carry melodies alongside that heavy stuff. So Blackbird from Alter Bridge is probably my third one.
Yeah. I love Blackbird as well. It's on my list. It just didn't, like, make top three.
Yeah, the top three, yeah.
My number 3, are these in order? I don't even know if these in order. I'm missing so many great ones. We can briefly list them. But I'm going to go with Elephant by the White Stripes.
Oh, okay.
This is just, like, I think, the coming together of all the best ideas of what the White Stripes are all about, where it's bluesy, it's rock, it's raw, but it's also, like, Jack White really went through lengths to record this album on really retro equipment. And now I sound like a music snob, but, like, I think it adds a lot to this album. And of course, Seven Nation Army, and I must admit, I'm a bit sick of that song and the way that it's just dominated a generation.
It's almost come Beatles-esque in a way, right?
Totally.
It's just like,
That's
you've just heard that a million times, yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny that Jack White gave an interview saying, someone asked him, like, where did the name Seven Nation Army even come from? And he said when he was younger, he misheard people say that the Salvation Army was the Seven Nation Army. So, anyway, fun story. But I just think this album is so impressive, and obviously, I think Jack White himself, I'm a big fan of, like, the Dead Weather, the Raconteurs, Jack White's solo stuff, but the White Stripes is where I think he was finding himself the most, and obviously reached massive mainstream success, and all of that. He's just a very unusual guy, and honestly, in my opinion, one of, like, the most talented musical people since the Beatles. I don't know, since whenever. Like, he's important to the generation of music and kind of what he's done, and I think he's a big, like, music archivist as well. Like, he's very into, like, how do we protect music and its history and all these things. So that's not. I'm going off piece from the album here, but, like, I absolutely love Elephant. Like, I got into this, a couple of my friends, Charlie and Luke, like, they were obsessed by Jack White, and I got into him a bit later than them, and Elephant is definitely the best White Stripes album. Like, there's a few great ones, but this is the best of the best, and I love it. It's raw, it's heavy, and I think I can describe all these albums as raw and heavy, to be honest, because that's kind of what I like. Is you do notice when a band is at their peak versus, like, when they're churning out albums. And I'm not saying Jack White's ever churned out an album, but I'm just trying to say, like, Elephant is definitely, like, him at the peak of his powers, in my opinion. It's great.
Amazing, yeah. I never really got that into that stuff, but I know have always been a huge fan of it, and seen him live and stuff, and it's really, really cool. I just wanted to give a shout out to one artist who is close to both of our hearts, who needs no introduction, but is a classic of the late 2000s or the early 2000s, late 90s. Of course, Britney Spears. I mean, come on, come the fuck on! Like, holy shit, Britney Spears fucking kills it, like every single time. Yeah, like over your stag do, like we just spent ages just fucking listening to Britney Spears stuff. Like we're like drunk as hell, like trying to get to sleep, and we're like, hey, let's just listen to some fucking Britney Spears. And that was so good.
Tunes absolutely smack. They are just so strong, strong.
Yeah, amazing stuff. So top tier list number one is Britney Spears, and then all the rest that we just talked about, obviously. Exactly. She's the greatest of all time.
Do you want to run through quickly a handful of other albums?
Oh, sure. If you want to go through some other bands or stuff that you want to shout out, yeah.
Shall I just run through mine quickly?
Yeah, go for it.
Avenged Sevenfold, City of Evil. It's kind of, was it their breakthrough? I think it was kind of their breakthrough. It was like before the big albums. Obviously the Rev was still with them, and like he was such a crucial part of like the songwriting. This album is just very, I mean, visually they tried to make like the album artwork look a lot like Iron Maiden. I don't know if it sounds as much like Iron Maiden, but it's the most kind of melodic, fast, heavy album, I'd say. I think a lot of the other ones slow down a lot. Like some of the best tracks on Nightmare, I think, are like City of Evil, in my opinion, whereas City of Evil is just so consistent all the way through. And then I'm a big Nirvana fan, and I think the best Nirvana album, it kind of has to be Nevermind. I'm a big fan of In Utero, but Nevermind I think is more consistently strong. And yeah, Blackbird we've already talked about. I absolutely love that. And then Muse is a really big band that we've been to see live a few times. Trying to think, I'd probably go with Origin and Symmetry, honestly. Like,
Origin and Symmetry is pretty good. I would go Black Holes and Revelations personally. That's the one I got into them with. I
can be tempted by that way as well. So yeah, there's a couple of Muse albums, but there's loads more. And there's one more I want to shout out is Queen. And the two best albums I think are Night at the Opera and Sheer Heart Attack, like the old stuff, the good stuff. Love it.
Yeah. For me, I would say probably, I think Ride the Lightning might be my favorite Metallica album front to back. Just like, I think Metallica has great songs on all of their albums, but like, I think Ride the Lightning is the one where every single piece of it, I'm like, yes, that's a great song.
Fade to Black's Ride the Lightning, right?
I believe Fade to Black
that's my number one Metallica song by a mile, actually.
Fade to Black's amazing. It's For Whom the Bell Tolls, Creeping Death, Call of Cthulhu, which is like the instrumental before what's his face died. Cliff died. Master of Puppets is a great album as well, but I think Red Lightning is probably the one that I like the most overall. I think the Black Album is still very good also, but yeah, lots of amazing Metallica stuff. Biffy Clyro, Only Revolutions, like that's a seminal album for me. I think that's a excellent piece of work, and one that really got me into that band. I didn't really get that much into their other stuff, but that album stands out as like a solid classic. I think Riot from Paramore is like the one that got me into that band as well. Like obviously Misery Business is like the song, but every song on that album is a banger, and I think overall it's just a really cohesive piece of work. I think like All Time Low have lots of albums that I like a lot. I'm not sure if there's one in particular, but just I like them generally. And then for me, like a classic one that I got into when I was much younger is Sum 41, who I love. And I kind of go between Does This Look Infected and Chuck as my two favorites. Like
Does This Look Infected is more consistently good in my opinion.
It is more consistent.
Chuck has No Reason and We're All to Blame, which are better songs.
Yeah. Chuck is a heavier album. Does This Look Infected is more of a poppy album. But they're both like fantastic. And I also wanted to shout out a band called Crystalline, who is like the band that I most recently got into, who I got into because I was watching this Twitch streamer and she was like, I've got music. And I was like, I'll check that out. I'm like, holy shit, this fucking rocks. Like this stuff is so good. I think that the band kind of dissolved and she's just Twitch streaming now. But Crystalline with a Y on Spotify, they are very good. I think the band I got into before that, hey, do you I like female vocalists with like pop punk albums. That's kind of what I'm into. And Tonight Alive is another one that I've recently they
went off the deep end.
it was not great. But The Other Side, which is the album, I think maybe their second album, is awesome. Like it's so good. So that was one that I got very very into. I say recent. I'm like, wait, that was probably like 7 years ago now. So I don't know. I've not been deep into music in a long time, but you can clearly tell from all the stuff that we're talking about. We used to be very very deep on this stuff, and just kind of has fallen off. But in any case, that's how it went. But yeah. There you go.
That's quite a discussion on music.
Yeah, it was a lot. Jesus.
Again, apologies to the Beatles fans out there. Right, our next email is from Jackpot, who's from British Columbia, which is in Canada. It says, speedrunning. Ever thought about trying it? If you had to pick a game to attempt a world record, which game do you think you'd have the best shot? I find events like GDQ fascinating. The display of skill from the runners is amazing. I don't think I could ever have that level of concentration to master one game, nor do I think I would want to, considering that I like to spend time playing lots of different things all the time. Curious on your thoughts. Best, Jackpot.
Speed running is cool. I think it's cool, and it's one of those things that I don't think I would ever get into, but like, I remember some of the first internet stuff we got deep into was like Ocarina of Time speedrun stuff, where I would download videos from the internet from a guy called TSA, right? And I was like, look, this guy, he's amazing, so cool. Later I found out, I think only last year I found this out, that TSA is in fact Michael Damiani of Easy Allies, and that's fucking wild to me. Like, what the hell? This was something that we were downloading in, like, I don't know, 2007 or 2006, like early internet of us like getting into, like, we're just very into Zelda, I think, right? We're just like so deeply into Zelda, and like we got into that by like watching speed runs downloaded from Speed Demo's archive, because like that was the only internet video stuff you could kind of download at the time. This was like pre-YouTube, I guess, in some ways. And I remember that very vividly and very fondly. And then like when stuff like Twilight Princess started getting speed run at these events, like I remember both of us being like, oh shit, that's so cool. Like, look, all this glitches and like how you can finish Twilight Princess or Wind Waker in like these wild ways. So like I think Zelda has always been such a core pillar of the speedrunning community, but it's kind of the way that I got into it in a way as well. So yeah, how about you, Bally? What's your feelings on speedruns?
Yeah, I don't watch a ton, honestly, and like I have watched the occasional. I kind of watch a bit of chunks here and there of GDQ. Like, it's very hard to just like keep up with the community and what's going on and these sorts of things. And my experience of speedrunning is honestly, I wouldn't. Does this kind of speed? I would honestly class things like time trials, honestly, and stuff like Mario Kart. That's kind of like the closest I've ever gotten to like elite play, you might want to say, or like
sure. Yeah.
So at uni, me and my flatmate, we could just go at it at Mario Kart on Wii, and we'd have just on Mario Circuit every day. He'd play as one character, I'd play as another, and we would just like, if he was in lectures, I'd be just constantly trying to get the best time, and then we'd swap around, and he would constantly be trying to get the best time, and we would just go back and forth until we just erasing tiny chunks of time, just constantly off each other's times. That was very satisfying. But I think before that, honestly, Mario Kart time trials with Double Dash were a big thing I was into, and it was back in the NOM days, Nintendo Official Magazine.
Yeah.
And they'd have loads of people write in with their time trials at their best times. I think they even like opened it up to like across Europe or something, and asked loads of people to write in. And I would like try and beat the times on all the tracks there, and I managed to do it on like quite a good chunk of the tracks. Honestly, I was like, I'm the fastest in Europe at this track because I beat the time on the NOM.
I remember you doing that. Yeah.
And that's the closest I've come, and they got and that's kind of why my original GameCube analog stick is so buggered. It's just like constantly playing Double Dash. Yeah. But I think ultimately I don't want to be a mono gamer, and it's really. Like, obviously with the podcast, it'd be kind of boring if I just checked in every single episode, like, so I got this time on this track, or hey, I beat Zelda a little bit faster, and so like it's interesting hearing.
I don't know, it's interesting you say that, because Dan Reichert recently has been getting into speedrunning Punch-Out, right? And I actually really like hearing his check-ins of like, this is what I learned and this is what I was doing. Like, he almost is taking like a training montage, right? And reporting back on like what did kind of skills did he do to kind of push things further, and explaining the intricacies of it, and like what you need to do, and like being frame perfect for this final fight that he has to do, and that sort of stuff. So I don't know. It might be interesting actually to like speedrun a game and do it every time.
Honestly, if I was to get into speedrunning, it would probably be an action-based game.
Yes.
Like Mario Kart, like Punch-Out, I don't know. But like listening to Dan, he's honestly put me off more than he's convinced me, because hearing about like his wrists and essentially carpal tunnel syndrome, right? Like icing he's done and stuff like I play a lot of video games, and I'm always a little bit wary in the back of my mind, like, is there long-term damage I'm doing to like my like
well,
hands?
we don't really know, right? Because this generation is the first to grow up with it, so no one has gotten to like, no one has had a full 78 years of life playing games and seeing what it does at the end. So we're like the first generation test case of that.
And my ethos is, as long as I always play a balance of games that is not just pure action and intense boss fights after intense boss fights, or just doing Mario Kart time trials, or just playing Mario Party mashing, as long as I'm
just playing Federation Force non-stop.
Playing Federation Force non-stop. God, that game's tough. As long as I'm mixing up with 60-hour RPGs that are a lot less intense on my hands and these sorts of things, my ethos is that I'll probably be fine. And like, yes, I might need to ice pack once in the future. I don't know. Who knows? But that's my ethos. The idea that I would just hammer my hands up against a single game like Punch-Out or Super Punch-Out and just try and... that really kind of terrifies me and would massively put me off speedrunning, honestly. Plus, I have a kid and no time, so I'm not exactly gonna...
No, it's just not going to happen.
I'm not going to suddenly take up another hobby right now, but...
yeah, exactly.
That's kind of how I feel.
In terms of like watching speedruns, do you prefer ones... because I think there's kind of a split between people. Do you prefer speedruns that are like super glitchy and like getting to the end by any means possible?
I prefer no glitch. glitch.
You just prefer like doing it fast, basically.
Yeah. I think exposing glitches obviously is a skill.
Yeah.
But I think there's something more relatable about watching something like, I know, Celeste with no glitches. And, you know, it's like, I can play Celeste. I could do this. It's like, I don't feel like I would have to learn a glitch to be on their level. I feel like I just have to get better at the game, which feels like a different trajectory that's more appealing to me. I know you're all about the glitches.
Oh, right? I'm the total opposite.
Right,
like
totally.
I'm like, show me the fucked up shit you can do. Absolutely. Like that was the thing that got me so interested in Zelda speedruns, was stuff like people trying to like get over the invisible wall in Wind Waker at the bottom of Hyrule, right? Like, but which I still think is impossible. I still think no one has found a way of doing that. It's like an impossible thing that speedrunning community has never been able to do, is like get past that invisible barrier into Hyrule in Wind Waker. But like the way that Ocarina of Time has been utterly fucking broken, to where you put in these inputs at the very beginning of the game and you warp yourself from the first boss room literally to the credits. And like, I love that. I think it's so cool that people have figured out, like, have reverse engineered the game to such an extent that they have like found these invisible triggers and all this stuff that like essentially tricks the game into thinking it has been finished. I think that stuff is fascinating. Like, I've watched a bunch of Elden Ring speedruns after finishing that game, and like there are a couple of different categories where there's this one category where there's this one thing that you can do that basically warps you across the map instantaneously, and it is like frame perfect shit, like really impossible to do, but if you pull it off, you can beat Elden Ring in about 6 or 7 minutes. It is wild. And there's other stuff that you can do in that game where like you can get Torrent to basically run across any piece of like anywhere, basically as if there's land. So he's like basically floating on air like a flying horse essentially, and that is used a bunch of times in the kind of regular non-full, like it still uses glitches like stuff like that, but it's not the full kind of like teleport one that a lot of people do. And that speedrun still takes like 30 minutes. So like I think there are like variations of, you know, which kind of glitches you use and which ones are like thought of in different ways. And yeah, I love the kind of variance that happens there. But also the thing that I like about it is generally those speedruns are always going to be like maximum 40 minutes long, right? So I don't have to spend 2 hours watching someone do a perfect Celeste speed run, which I'm sure is very impressive, but to me it's like, well, it's 2 hours. I want to see something quick happen, right? It's called speed running for a reason. I want to see something in under 30 minutes that's impressive, and I think that's why I gravitate towards that stuff a bit more. And also just like, it's stuff I've never seen before, right? Whereas I think more straight ahead, just do it whatever way, is more like, yeah, this is what I expect to do. You're just doing it you're just like doing it, nailing every single aspect essentially. So Yeah.
What game would you speedrun? And I know the answer to this.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, the number one answer is Metroid Fusion, I think. Like,
Yeah.
that's the game that I know so intimately well that I would want to. The ironic thing, though, is I've never actually got the fastest ending for Metroid
How
Fusion,
fast is
which
that?
I think it's sub 2 hours if you can do, and this is going by in-game clock, right? So in-game clock is slightly different from outside of that, where the in-game clock doesn't count cutscene time and stuff like that, and loading to save rooms and all those sort of things. It cuts it out. It's just pure movement. Like if you're on a map screen, it doesn't count that time, all that sort of stuff. So I've never been able to do that, but I've never really tried. I think part of the reason why is every time I play Metroid Fusion, my brain is like, I know where all these things are, so I need to get them, right? So I'm like, oh, I know if I break that block there, I'm going to get a missile tank. So I'm just going to do it because I need to collect. Like, my brain is so collection hungry with this series that, like, I want to have all the missile tanks and I want to have all the energy tanks as well. And that kind of breaks me from doing it faster because I'm always going to every room because, as you know, I have a sickness where I need to fill in every fucking square to the point.
But also beating the game with so few energy tanks that's more my wheelhouse of beating Super Metroid. You know?
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot harder as well.
It's hard. I think I personally think Metroid Fusion is a really tough Metroid game with some tough bosses, and the idea of beating some of those bosses with limited energy tanks that's hard stuff.
Yeah, same with Dread, right? Like they're both very similar in that way. They're both really challenging games, and so you kind of want to have a lot of health so that you can survive those later encounters, but speedrunning requires that you survive all of them with minimal stuff because you're kind of skipping over all of those little things, which I think would make it quite hard. I don't know. I think that like there are a lot of like technical things that go into games like Fusion and Dread that I don't know that my hands have the ability to pull off, right? Like even stuff where like I remember when we got back to Melee and we're like, can we wave dash? And we're like, no, very quickly, we're like, I don't think we can ever fucking do this. Like, it's just not going to happen. So stuff like that where I think you kind of need to learn it young and get good at it, and like eventually you'll get there is much harder to approach these days when you're older. So, but I'm similar to you in that I think it has to be something action focused, but I think even more so than that, it has to be something movement focused. And that's why I think Dread would be a lot of fun because it is so fluid and fast and you just get places. But, you know, stuff like Celeste and Hades are good examples of games where it's just like fluid movement. Hades is a weird one because roguelikes and speedruns is always tough because like there's random elements there, so how do you account for that? You know, I don't know how that works, but as a more recent example, something like Ollie Ollie World, where you know you just learn the course and you just fucking nail the timing on everything, that sort of thing, because like there is a set kind of length of those courses and a set kind of speed maximum that you can hit, and like what is the exact apex and the point that you hit in order to nail it and get through it first time, right? That sort of speed challenge, which kind of like goes into stuff like Wario Land, right? Like I think Wario Land of all the Mario platformers would be one I'd get into speedrunning, especially because Pizza Tower's just come out and Pizza Tower looks like super movement focused. Like those types of games I would get very into, and generally I would say 2D games over 3D games, because with 3D games it feels like there's so much more room for error and messing up and specific placement in 3D space, right? Like for that Elden Ring trick to work, like you have to be in very specific spots and like very specific frames in order to do that. And in a 2D game, there's just less parameters, so it's easy. I would think anyway, it would be easier to pull off speedrunning tricks because you only have to deal with two planes of existence versus in 3D where it's just like really much harder to be like frame perfect and nailing it every single time. So I think the only kind of 3D game I would attempt would be something like Titanfall 2, where it's really movement focused and it's about speed. And like one of the fun things about Titanfall 2 is its opening tutorial is essentially a speedrun level, and you should look this up if you haven't seen it before, but Titanfall 2 speedrunning for that first opening tutorial is like one of the most popular things out there, because it's like the entire thing is like an obstacle course built for precision, speed, like absolutely nailing every single aspect. I remember Brad Shoemaker over at Giant Bomb spent a bunch of streams trying to like nail the times on that thing and trying to like beat some of the times, which are really, really difficult to do because it just requires absolute precision. But Titanfall 2 is a game that's all about momentum and movement and wall running and double jumping and speed. It's purely focused on that. So stuff like that, or like Sunset Overdrive, or like games that just are really momentum based, I would get into for speedrunning, I think. What about you, Bally?
Oof. I mean, Mario Kart doesn't really count, I guess, but
I think it does count. Like, I think
so.
If you're talking about time trials, I'd call that a form.
It's kind of like the highest. I'm just trying to think of the games I'm probably the highest level skill in, and honestly, it's probably Mario Kart. I don't think there's many games I'm that particularly high skill in. Honestly, like. And then the game I'm most familiar with is honestly something like Wind Waker. But as we've talked about, the popularity of Zelda, that's a pretty high threshold. Of, like, trying to get on those time trials is pretty hard. And honestly, I don't think there's a ton of other games I'm that good at, honestly. Like, I'm pretty good at 3D platformers. What's a 3D platformer?
I think Odyssey might be a fun one to do.
Yeah, Odyssey, something like that. Like, I think I'm better at 3D platforms than 2D personally. But yeah, I'd probably go for something like an Odyssey, or even like Mario Sunshine. Like, I'm quite good at Mario Sunshine. I'll take it. Let's do that.
Yeah, Sunshine, or I think Odyssey's a fun one because, like, even regular play of Odyssey, you almost feel like you're doing speedrunner stuff, right? Like the whole hat throw to dive to jump to hat throw again to dive. Like, there's a real. You really have to press a lot of buttons to make that work properly, and it definitely took a while. I remember playing that game for the first time to be like, how do I nail the maximum jump distance here with this hat throw? And there's a speedrunniness to that, right? Like, it feels like a technique in a way, and I'm sure obviously speedrunners in Odyssey do a lot wilder shit than that, but I think that that as a... just the level of expressivity you have in Odyssey to move around means that you almost feel like you have those capabilities from the get-go. So, yeah, I could see that working for you, definitely.
Yeah.
But
it's not going to happen anytime soon. Like I said, I want to keep my hands intact.
It's fine. Just wait until you're like Dan and have a midlife crisis and then suddenly get into speedrunning Wind Waker. It'll be great. Yeah,
I'll get the ice packs ready and let's
Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, that is going to do us. Thanks, everybody, for writing in. But as always, we still need more emails. So, Bally, where can they send them to?
Please send them to ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That's ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com.
Fantastic. Appreciate everybody sending stuff in. And if you've never done it before, go ahead, go do it. You can also hop onto our Discord and do it. And that's a fun way to get involved. So check that stuff out. Bally, it's time to get on out of here and go and do things. And I don't know, wait for Zelda, which is just approaching. Approaching very rapidly. But you can find us all over the place on the internet. First thing you can do is, if you would like, you can go and support us on patreon.com. It's a fun place to go, and you can get some bonus episodes and things like that. So, Bally, who do we have to thank for our Patreons this week?
Thank you to our $10 plus patrons. They are Zach S, Thomas, Matthew, Albert, and Wicked Gamer UK Alan. But thank you also to all of our patrons. It's hugely appreciated, the support you give the show. We've got a couple of bonus shows over there on $1 and $2 tiers, so check those out.
And if you want to hear my fun travels in America, I've been popping that onto the bonus kind of extra things we're doing for $5 patrons. So if you want to hear me basically audio logging my way around America.
There's spicy chicken sandwiches involved. There's Disneyland involved. There's GDC. There's MBZ walking up to random video game celebs and saying hi. It is well worth a listen. I had a really good time with that one.
Yeah, there's also me going up a hill and being like, hey, this is like what happened in Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, and then talking about that for 5 seconds.
MZ moaning about Ubering everywhere.
And,
moaning about the United States generally. So that's good. It's a good time.
Yeah, so check that out if you feel so inclined. And you can do that by heading over to patreon.com/ThisNintendoLife. Obviously, you can find us on other places on the internet. You can find me on Twitter @LordNBZ. Where can they find you, Bally?
I'm on Twitter @Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN91.
Amazing. You can also find the podcast Twitter @TNL Podcast. That's where you want to go for all the stuff related to the show. Wow, I rhymed that. That's magic. You can can just head on over there. It's a fun time. Obviously, you can find the show in various places, such as Spotify, such as Stitcher, such as any podcasting app that you have available to you, where you can go into a search thing and type in This Nintendo Life and just hit the download subscribe button. It's a great thing. You'll get it to your device every couple of weeks. It's amazing. It's magic. It's truly the world that we live in now is crazy. You know, like we recorded an episode and I scheduled it, and then it came out, and I was in America. I didn't have to press any buttons. It just magic went on the internet. Look at that. Wow. The internet is magic. It's amazing. So yeah, do that. And I think that's it. I think that's probably everything that we have.
Guess
for
what
today.
is coming out, MBZ?
Oh gosh, a movie, I guess.
Oh yeah, we are gonna go see the Mario movie.
Which I think we're gonna be a little late to the party on that because everyone probably has seen it by this point.
Yeah.
But you know, we'll come with some nuanced takes.
Time. I was actually gonna say, it is finally the return of Advance Wars.
Oh, I totally forgot about that.
To our Nintendo systems.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I'm gonna be Octopath Traveler in time, but I'm gonna try. And
okay.
Yeah, so I'm excited for a bit of reboot camp. It's looking good.
Yeah, definitely.
Caroline's interested in playing it as well.
Ooh, that's cool.
Here's another thing. Caroline was so sold on Zelda that we're buying 2 copies of Zelda. Tears of the Kingdom.
This is what happens. Yeah, this is the price you pay.
Happen.
Yep. Yeah, it's cool. I think like that's the fun thing about this game as well is like trading stories about it, right? And just seeing what happens and what everyone else comes up with.
Different direction to me. And
totally.
I'm like, I found this thing, and she's like, I found this thing.
And you'll be like, oh no, I can't look at the screen for spoilers.
I don't want to look at it.
So,
yeah. Or when we both played Breath of the Wild, I think you were like 20, 30 hours ahead of me.
I think
but there were still things I was seeing that you hadn't seen yet.
Oh yeah,
where we were on the map and stuff.
That's the thing. That's the joy of it.
Yeah.
So looking forward to some more of that joy, and it will be coming soon. But I think that's going to do us. It's going to wrap us up. So thanks everybody for listening. We will be back soon with some more video games and Nintendo chatter. Until then, thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye, folks. The musical interlude used on today's show was Sonic's theme from The Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog. Copyright Sega 2023.